So we're just trying to get to anyone, and most importantly, anyone who is on the floors in the North Tower of 100 and above that made it out safely.
Sean has an organized platoon of many friends to meet him here and start the search.
Melissa has so many friends. People have stayed up for the last 2 nights. No sleep.
And Sean says he will keep looking, hoping to hear his wife's voice again.
I'm not going to stop till I get my wife, till I find her.
It is now 10:08 Eastern Time. We want to give you a rundown on the latest developments tonight. The FBI says it has now positively identified all 18 suspected hijackers on the 4 planes involved in the attacks. There was some report from the FBI earlier that we may have some photos, but that's not going to happen for a time. Several people were being held and for questioning at New York City's airports tonight. Police say that a man carrying a false pilot's identification was detained after trying to get past security. All 3 area airports in New York City have been closed, adding once again to the chaos in America's skies. Vice President Cheney has been relocated to Camp David in Maryland, strictly officials say as a precaution. They want to separate the president and the vice president so there is not a common target if there's to be another terrorist attack. The numbers in New York City remain staggering. More than 4,700 people still missing in the World Trade Center attack. But to bring us up to date now on what's going on at New York City airports, we're going to go to NBC's Virginia Shaw, who is at Kennedy Airport tonight. Do they still have some people in custody, Virginia?
Yes, Tom. Actually, you mentioned earlier, this is information according to New York's police commissioner. A man carrying false pilot's identification was arrested late this afternoon while trying to get through airport security here at JFK. Shortly after that, JFK was shut down. Only planes that were already in the air have been allowed to land. In addition to that, 5 to 6 others have been detained at New York airports for questioning. Some of those people, we are told, are Arab nationals. The questioning being conducted by members of the Joint Terrorist Task Force as well as the FBI. Now, all 3 metropolitan airports, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark, are shut down until further notice. We have seen all kinds of examples of heightened security here at JFK in several locations. In fact, we are right now being kept at a distance uncharacteristically, but we do have some video to show you to give you examples of what's happening. This is the Port Authority Police Building. That is a sniper, an armed police sniper on the roof. There are armed guards down below, some with helmets and rifles. As you can see, there are barricades to keep unauthorized vehicles out of there. I noticed FBI agents arriving on the scene. Now, Port Authority Police made that arrest. We can only assume that the questioning is being conducted in that building, which is why they are keeping everyone away. There was also increased police presence at the terminals. Many more officers in uniform. You can see them in the terminal areas where mostly passengers would normally be again tonight. The airport is closed. And also I noticed U.S. Marshals, federal marshals here on site, all part of the latest security plan out of Washington. Now, of course, federal officials have been aware of and have been on the lookout for further terrorist activity, and today's arrest, we may assume, could be an example of just that. Tom?
Virginia, what happened to those planes that were on the tarmac when they began to detain these people and shut down JFK? Were they asked to return to the gate, or did they allow some to take off and then send other passengers home?
We've been told by Port Authority that they were detained and not allowed to take off. Only planes that had already taken off and were their destination here were allowed to come in and land, but no one was allowed to take off for a new flight arriving, and no one was allowed to depart from here, Tom.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Virginia Shaw tonight at New York's JFK, which is a principal departure point, of course, for international and transcontinental flights as well, but also LaGuardia and Newark Airport were closed down today. Newark, of course, was the point of departure for the United flight that eventually was crashed into the ground just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Tuesday's violence leaves behind broken buildings in New York City and shattered feelings of security. As anyone who walked the streets of the city knows, New York is fractured in spirit as well. Here's Dateline's John Hockenberry.
New York has always been a city of islands, towns, villages, distinct neighborhoods, Soho, Murray Hill, Gramercy Park, Midtown, one place blurring into the next. This week, though, there are only two New Yorks, and the dividing line between them is clear. 14th Street, suddenly a place of checkpoints and congestion.
From 14th Street to Broadway down to Canal Street is a frozen zone.
Above 14th, there is one city, below it, quite another. Manhattan has been turned upside down.
I think you're going to get a feeling that it's a tale of two cities. You know, downtown is totally different from up here. But at the same time, there's definitely a feeling around here that there's something wrong.
Above 14th, the streets and gay facades where nothing sleeps have been quiet, desolate. While in what otherwise would be the abandoned canyons of the financial district, the nighttime lights are blinding, and the work is grim and round the clock. On the third day after the attack, downtown and uptown have their own distinct ways of dealing with an event that has changed this city forever. Downtown, the streets are for emergency vehicles and for walking. A man in Tribeca feels the isolation.
It's like a ghost town down here. They've blockaded the area. Our friends can't come down and see us. So we feel like we're being held hostage.
It just feels the rhythm is very different down here now.
For some, like this resident of Soho, the sober, peaceable pavement is welcome.
It's actually kind of nice not to have so many people, and just to have the quiet and sereneness that we lack most of the time. It kind of helps, you know, not feel so overwhelmed by the situation, I think.
Dazed faces turned inward to make sense of a world gone mad.
I think people in New York, the best way they can deal with this right now is not only to deal with their own grief, which we all feel and have, but to show that we're not going to be in any way affected by this, that we're not going to be cowed by it, that we're not afraid, that we're going to go about our business and lead normal lives.
Uptown people are trying. The look is of a normal late summer day. The feelings are closer to winter.
I think it's just taking time, that people are taking their time to get back into stride.
Today, normal is something you have to reach for.
When you look around now, it feels like life is back to normal. Unless you turn TV on and you talk to people, because this is all what people are talking about now.
Lisa DeMott was downtown when the attack came.
I saw half that fireball on television and ran out front to see that fireball going up.
She says she is now bound to the event. It has somehow defined her and transformed her Soho neighborhood from this to this. She says she doesn't like to leave now.
I immediately started to cry when I got uptown because I felt tiny and alone. Because at least down here, everyone has got it on they're wearing it on their face.
Here at 48th and 6th, the streets are clean. The pedestrian traffic is normal. The breeze contains just a touch of the acrid smell of smoke and debris blowing in from downtown. But as the street numbers go down, as they did last night when I left from this place to go to my home, the air grows thick until the smell is overwhelming. And the gray dust and mud is everywhere. You can't avoid it. The pulverized remains of the vanished landmark that once signified downtown New York.
At the remaining landmarks in this city, people try to memorialize the dead. They light candles.
I came here to pray for the people who are sad and the people who are dead.
Uptown or down, in a way, everyone in this city is searching through emotional rubble for what they called home, hoping to recognize what they find.
Dateline's John Hockenberry. The churches are doing brisk business as well in New York. There was a church bulletin board in Manhattan today with this saying on the outside: God cares beyond reason. In New York, we're counting on that. The World Trade Center attack was aimed right at America's financial heart, of course, so it is not surprising that corporate America has paid the highest human cost. Thousands of its workers are missing and presumed to be dead. Now the financial community grieves and is trying to repair these devastating wounds. CNBC anchor Maria Bartiromo joins us tonight with the latest on the plans for reopening the markets and how the financial district is coping. Maria?
And Tom, while many Wall Street firms today actually attempted to get back to business, one major issue remained at the core of most conversations: people. Brokerage firms have set up trauma centers, hired psychologists, raised financial aid, anything at all to pull together and help victims and their families.
For the first time since Tuesday, some U.S. exchanges opened for business today. At the Chicago Board of Trade, there was a moment of silence at noon for the victims of Tuesday's attack. The loss of their colleagues in the business community has been staggering. Large and small, so many companies suffered devastating losses in Tuesday's attack. Marsh & McLennan, an insurance company, can only account for 1,000 of its 1,700 employees. At Fred Alger & Company, the president and 38 of its 55 employees housed at the Trade Center are missing. Credit Suisse First Boston had offices at 5 World Trade Center, directly across from the Twin Towers. That building was also severely damaged. While 10% of those employees remain unaccounted for, the firm believes everyone was evacuated in time.
We're making every effort to contact family members and find out.
John Mack is the CEO of CSFB, one of the world's largest investment banks.
I don't think anyone in this business will not be affected by this, will know someone or will have a family member or a friend who's been a casualty of this event.
The tragedy also struck a personal note for Mack. He was president of Morgan Stanley for 8 years. And on Tuesday, when he realized the World Trade Center had been hit, like so many others, he raced to the phone.
The first firm I called is my old firm, Morgan Stanley.
You led Morgan Stanley for many years, and I'm sure have many, many personal relationships. Do you know the extent of what has happened?
Well, the first call, it was difficult to reach them. Early on, they were very concerned that the casualty rate would be dramatic. But since that time, it seems that a number of their people were able to get out.
In fact, Morgan Stanley estimates that 3,000 of its 3,500 employees got out safely. The New York Stock Exchange remains closed for the 3rd straight day, the longest shutdown in 80 years. But for now, Mack says the main focus needs to be on employees.
I'm worried about my people. The people here are exhausted. They've been working all day, all night. They are beginning to feel the impact of what's happened to the street, what's happened to their friends and their family. And at the same time, they've been trying to put this market and this infrastructure back up to work.
Getting back to work is important, not just for the business need of the company, but also for the people that survive and need to be able to return to work to continue the life of the organization.
Paul Offman is a psychologist with RHR International, which specializes in helping companies deal with disaster. But he has never seen anything like this.
There's no precedent that I'm aware of in modern time, not related to war, where a large community has had this kind of impact with such tremendous devastation, the dimensions of which we're only going to begin to understand over the coming days and weeks.
It's not hard to look at the devastation and wonder if any of it can be rebuilt. John Mack believes it can, but it will never be like it was before.
I don't think it will ever go back to normal. All you need to do is to drive down the west side and you look down at the very tip of Wall Street and you don't see those 2 buildings. It will never go back to normal in my view.
Like so many others, Credit Suisse First Boston started a relief fund for the victims' families, as well as firefighters and rescue workers lost in the devastation. Now, right after I spoke with John Mack, he met with 35 of Wall Street's leaders and announced that trading would resume at the New York Stock Exchange on Monday. We will likely see technology checks over the weekend, and of course, over the weekend, the rescue effort continues outside of the exchange. Tom.
Thank you, Maria. And the rest of the country is getting an accurate portrait of the compassionate hearts of the rich and powerful on Wall Street. as well. We want to go to Denver now, and NBC's Pete Williams, he's got the latest for us on the investigation that continues this evening. Pete, what do you have for us?
Well, Tom, it's a somewhat confusing picture about precisely what's happening at the 3 airports in the New York area. We know they were closed down. We know they were closed down after some people tried to board airplanes today once air travel resumed. And they tried to board these planes in JFK and LaGuardia, John F. Kennedy and LaGuardia airports using false documents that suggested they were pilots when they were not, false documents that suggested they were airline employees when they were not. We're told that there were 3 separate incidents of this in the New York airports. However, what isn't clear as authorities to continue to investigate these people tonight is precisely what they were up to. You would have to assume they were up to no good, I would think. I can't imagine anyone who thinks that it would be a good idea in these times to try to use false pilot documents to board an airplane after air travel had just started up. So it can't be an accident. The question is, what does it mean? Were these people potentially involved with the terrorists, the hijackers, the 18 hijackers? Were they trying to get out of the New York area so they wouldn't be found? Were they trying to mount another attack? Not clear. Now, there have been a number of reports tonight that these people who were detained, some of them had been wearing pilots' uniforms. We're told that's not true. There had been reports that they were carrying weapons. We are told that's not true. But this is very much a developing story. They're still doing the interviews there. It's a somewhat confusing picture depending on who you talk to. Whether you get a little piece of it over here from state officials, whether you get a little piece of it over here from federal officials. So it's going to be a while before this sorts out. Tonight, the Justice Department had said it would release pictures of the 18 hijackers. That will now happen, we're told, tomorrow at a news conference with the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI that will probably be around 12:30 or so Eastern Time. And they will give us the names of all 18 hijackers. Now, one other thing is going to happen in the next 12 or 24 hours, Tom. As the FBI has gone around the country looking for potential people who were involved with this incident, they've been picking up a lot of people on immigration charges. They're not filing criminal charges of terrorism or involvement in the attacks. They're simply saying, you know, we've got some questions for you, and we note, by the way, that your immigration papers are not in order, and they're detaining them. Under federal law, they have to be charged within 48 hours. So we may begin to see some additional information about some of these people who were picked up on INS charges in the next few hours, Tom.
All right, NBC's Pete Williams, who's keeping track of the investigation for us, a continuing confusing situation here in the New York City area tonight. Bottom line, all 3 major airports are shut down, only adding to the chaos around the New York metropolitan area, and of course, it's going to be a long, slow return to normal in the skies in this country, if you can describe what we're about to enter into as any kind of a state of normalcy. Joining us now from Washington is Donald Gambetisa. He's the Deputy Director of the U.S. Marshals Service, and today the Attorney General said that U.S. Marshals and employees of the U.S. Marshals Service would be sent out around the country to help with security at the airports. Can we also assume that some of your people will become air marshals, in effect, flying in plain clothes on airlines?
Well, Mr. Brokaw, shortly after the incident, the tragic terrorist attacks, we were directed by the Attorney General to assist in the development of a plan to increase security at our nation's airports. We did this in conjunction with the FAA, the Border Patrol, and the U.S. Customs Service.
But does that mean that there are going to be some people on board airplanes that we may not know about?
I'm not aware of that, and if that decision is made, it'll certainly be made at the highest levels of our government.
Mr. Gambetisa, you know, those of us who travel even casually or intensely have been aware, I think, that there is such an uneven security process in America these days. We go through the magnetometer, we put our bags through a belt. Sometimes the bag cannot change its contents. It may trigger at one airport, not at another. You have people who are hired for minimum wage manning those airport security gates. Are we going to have a lot more professional people and involved in airport security, and the U.S. Marshal Service can be a part of that?
Well, the FAA is currently responsible for the security process and processing passengers through. I would imagine, and there have been reports, that their security procedures will be tightened, and I'm assuming they will be. The Marshal Service and those who are assisting with the increased security presence at the airport will be involved in the screening process, but primarily as a deterrent and a show of force, so to speak, at the airports.
Is this short-term or long-term?
I'm not certain.
All right, Mr. Gambitisa, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
266 people on board the planes that crashed. 266 separate stories, plans, hopes, lives, at a sudden and for many unbelievable end. Now the farewells have begun. More on that from Dateline's Keith Morrison.
There will be, before this is over, so obscenely many of these. Memorials, words, memories. No body. This mass near San Francisco was for a man named Thomas Burnett. It's quite possible there'd have been even more funerals were it not for him.
He said that the hijackers were in the cockpit, and he had to go. He hung up.
Burnett is the man who called his wife, Dina, 4 times from that plane that went down near Pittsburgh. He told her they'd been hijacked and that he and some other passengers would try to overpower the hijackers.
I could tell from the way he was asking me questions that his adrenaline was flowing, and he was trying to assess the situation and solve the problem. And I have no doubt that he had formulated a plan to get the hijackers out of the cockpit and get home.
Would more on the ground have died if it hadn't been for that? And up in the air, what must they all have thought? So many of them were just starting important things that morning. Whole families like Leslie Whittington and her husband Charles Falkenberg and their 2 daughters. It had been such an exciting morning. Leslie was a Georgetown University economist. She was going to teach in Australia. They were starting an adventure. And how do you account for terrible coincidence? This is Ruth McCourt and her daughter Juliana. Their plane hit the tower in which Ruth's brother was working. He lived, and she and her daughter died. There was Lisa Frost, just 22, just graduated from Boston University, at the top of her class. She was on her way home to start her career. She was so motivated, said her dad, so determined.
She said, "Dad, I think I know what I want to do in life, and what I want to do is make a difference." She wanted to do something with her life that would make a difference in the world.
There was Robert LeBlanc, who had already made a difference in the world. LeBlanc was a professor emeritus of geography at the University of New Hampshire. Strange, the decisions that wind up becoming fate. There was the captain of American Flight 77, the one that crashed into the Pentagon, Charles Chick Burlingame. He was going to celebrate his 52nd birthday by attending an Angels baseball game in Anaheim. And when he couldn't get a decent seat at the game, he told his wife, Sherry, "Don't come on the flight this time." And just like that, she lived. Chick's sister, Deborah, said it's hard to imagine what happened on that plane.
They would have had to overpower him. They would have had to kill him or render him unconscious to get what they wanted.
So much damage. Daniel Lee, a set designer for the Backstreet Boys, was coming home to be with his wife for the arrival of their baby by C-section. The baby was born today. A girl, Allison Danielle Lee. Barry Berenson Perkins was an actress. She was in this movie, Cat People. She would have seen her 2 grown sons when she got back to Los Angeles. Instead, her family found itself writing a statement of condolence. Barry was a widow. Her husband was the actor Anthony Perkins. There was Sarah Lowe, a young flight attendant. Smart, pretty, popular, said her former teacher, and gone.
She was just everything you would want your daughter to be.
She had earned advanced degrees, but her father said she just loved to be with people and loved to fly. So many. Lawyer Alan Bevan was completing a transition to a volunteer job on the East Coast. Suzanne Calley was on her way home to her 20th wedding anniversary. "I love her more than life," said her husband. Carol Bouchard, a nurse, newly married, was afraid of flying, but did. This is her brother.
We're one family, mourning, but we stand with everyone else.
There is a Bishop Angel who takes some comfort too, as he thinks about his brother David, who made comedy shows on TV.
He brought a lot of laughter and a lot of joy into this world. And I think that's how we want to remember him.
Imagine just a few of the people who came down in 4 airplanes, and they turned out to be just a few of the very many. And out on the West Coast, a young woman attended a memorial service for all the victims this awful week. Wasn't sure where she should be.
My brother is with Engine 3 in New York, and they lost half of their men so far. And I guess I just feel this feeling of being here. I want to be home, even though I live here now. But all of us here are with them.
That was Dateline's Keith Morrison with just some of the stories of the people who lost their lives in the hijackings and in the rescue and recovery efforts. One of the most remarkable stories to emerge from Tuesday's day of terror is the heroism of those on board United Airlines Flight 93. We have been hearing fragments of those stories. That is the plane that crashed in rural southwest Pennsylvania. Aboard the plane, which may have been heading toward Washington, it did a sharp U-turn. Passengers who did vow that they would die fighting. One of them, 31-year-old Jeremy Glick, did manage to call his family as well from his cell phone and relay second-by-second details of what was happening on board that plane. Just a short time ago, Dateline's Jane Pauley sat down with the Glick family for an exclusive interview.
What is it about the story we're telling about Jeremy Glick that gives all of us comfort and strength?
I think because it shows that one person can make a difference and that everyone in this country has the opportunity to change this world and make a difference.
Do you believe in fate?
I do.
Do you believe your husband was fated to be on that plane?
I do. He was scheduled to fly out on an earlier flight the day prior. Even 3 days before the flight, he had begged me to have him stay home. He didn't want to go, and I said, you have to go. You know, you can't say no to your company. You need to go out on your business trip. And I think just with you know, all of the badness that's been going on, that, you know, God or some higher power knew that Jeremy had strength to somehow stop some of the bad that was going on.
What if he hadn't been on that plane?
I'm not asking that. I'm not asking that. I'm not going there.
Do you think it's possible that Jeremy may have saved the White House?
I think he saved it.
I think so.
I think he saved the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He saved the White House.
It's funny. I was speaking to a business associate who called me when he heard the news. And at that point, all we knew was that Jeremy was lost. We didn't know any of the other details. And he said to me, you know, that's the only plane that didn't hit something. Jeremy was on that plane. There's got to be a reason. And he wasn't the only one. 2 or 3 people came up and said exactly the same thing before they knew any of the details.
Liz, what words from that phone call give you the most comfort now?
We said I love you 1,000 times over and over and over again, and it just brought so much peace to us. And I mean, it wasn't even the word. I felt, you know, the feeling from it. And, you know, he told me to, you know, he said, I love Emmy, who's our daughter, and to take care of her. And then he said, you know, whatever decisions you make in your life, I need you to be happy, and I will respect any decisions that you make. And that's what he said. I think that gives me the most comfort.
Jane Pauley in her exclusive interview tonight with members of the Glick family, defiance amid desperation. The rest of Jane Pauley's exclusive interview tomorrow night. But now let's go to NBC's Rahema Ellis, who's standing by at the Bereavement Center in Lower Manhattan. And if ever a city needed such a center, this is the one. Rahema?
Tom, I'm at 26 and Lexington on the east side, and this is the armory behind me where thousands of people have been gathering all day long to go inside and give detailed information about their loved one who is missing, and they don't know what has happened. The information is extremely detailed. Not only do they want the birth and birth date and birthplace and social security number, but any and every kind of distinguishing mark that they could give them. From a birthmark, they want to know about dental records, prostheses, anything at all that will help these workers to identify victims. One man who's standing with me right now has gone through the process. You've been looking for your uncle.
Yes, ma'am, I have.
And tell me about him.
His name is Juan Garcia. Basically, he was kind of like a second father to me growing up. When I was, the short time I was living here in New York, took me just about everywhere, punished me whenever needed to be punished, just loving man. And
tell me, what kind of a man was he with his fellow workers that you were saying in terms of, he was a security guard? No, not a security guard. He worked at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 101st floor?
That's correct, ma'am. Actually, he was a restaurant worker.
He was a restaurant worker. He had been there for some time.
Yes, he's been there about 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
And this is a picture of him with his grandson.
Yes, ma'am, he sure is.
Sounds like a real family man.
Extremely, extremely. I mean, he's a guy that, you know, when he goes to work early, kisses his wife goodbye, and when he gets home, he kisses his wife hello.
When was the last time anyone in the family heard from him?
The last time someone spoke to him, it was about 5 in the morning, just before he left to go on the train to go to work. So, you know, his family woke up to say goodbye to him, and then I was...
Having some difficulty, there is obviously an overload on all of our facilities from downtown Manhattan, where NBC's Rahema Ellis was talking with someone who was trying to find a father figure for him, a man who worked in the food operation at Cantor Fitzgerald. So many of us had a connection to the World Trade Center. We visited there, or we had friends who worked there. A lot of people went there to shop. They rode to the top. They looked out in amazement from the observation deck. They went to the great dining room at the top as well. But for some, the connection was much more deeply personal than that. Their suffering is deep indeed. Here is John Hockenberry.
They called them the windows on the world. And once upon a time, on a clear day, they contained a view of 4 states, hundreds of towns and villages from which thousands each day made their way to the World Trade Center to work. Places with names like Summit, Woodcliff, Pleasantville, Garden City, Edgewater, New Hope. Places with green lawns and brick chimneys, 2-car garages, and the promise each day of escape from the big city. Homes untouched by the city's chaos, communities sustained by the city's wealth. In each of these places, nothing has changed, and everything has changed. Every one of these towns and villages has a story of loss and waiting. From each of these places, dozens, perhaps in some cases hundreds of people left for work on Tuesday morning. In so many communities, they are still waiting for mommies, daddies, loved ones to come home. The signs are everywhere. Cars parked and abandoned, commuter platforms suspiciously uncrowded, appointments missed, garments unclaimed. In Greenwich, the commute to downtown Manhattan is about 44 minutes. This week, each moment has been an eternity. Greenwich wife and mother Sophie Pelletier's husband Mike left at his normal time on Tuesday morning for work on the 105th floor of Tower 1. Sophie was taking their daughter out of the car seat when the phone rang.
I picked up and he was just panicked on the phone, telling me that the building had just been hit by a plane and that they were looking for a way out, but they didn't know how to get out, and just telling me that he loved me. And I know my husband, he wasn't calling to worry me. He was calling me because he thought it may be the last time he spoke to me.
Sophie tried to get help, calling 911. She reached a number in Connecticut. Her efforts were futile. Meanwhile, the Pelletier's friend Randy Christ had managed to reach Mike after trying desperately for half an hour. They spoke for 5 minutes.
I said, "What are you doing right now?" And he said, "I'm leaning out of the window. I'm trying to get air."
The phone went dead. About 30 minutes later, the tower collapsed. Sophie has had no further news from any source of Mike's fate.
I just want to have him home. He was my life, my soulmate, the father of my children, my husband. You know, I feel like I can't live without him, but I have to. If anyone has seen Mike or heard from him or heard that someone saw him, if you could please call us at home at 203-861-7811.
This community has mobilized itself for grief and the realization that it has become a city of orphaned children, widowed wives, and unanswered questions.
As an example, we have one family whose father was a Little League coach. And I have parents calling from his team and saying, what am I going to tell these children about where their coach is?
Here at the hairdressers, blanks instead of appointments, and fear of thinking too hard about the names.
Well, we had one lady whose husband worked in the building, and she spent most of the time here either on her telephone to people, or we had a couple of people run in and you know, wanted to try and contact people who are in the city.
Escape to the suburbs. The idea was once tantalizing to each of the people who decided to settle here in Greenwich, Connecticut, and the other communities that were once within view of the Twin Towers. Now around here, escape is all about life and death.
NBC's John Hockenberry demonstrating once again that wealth and privilege are no protection against these kinds of acts of terrorism. And joining us now from the Washington Post is America's best-known investigative reporter, Robert Woodward. Bob is breaking a story tonight. It's being posted right now at WashingtonPost.com. You'll be able to read more about it in tomorrow's editions. Bob, does the CIA tonight know where Osama bin Laden is?
No, I suspect they don't, but one of the very interesting things, the current intelligence shows that they've been able to, at least recently, physically observe him with some of their intelligence capabilities. It's part of a long program that's gone on for years, a kind of rich and active surveillance program directed at bin Laden, who's definitely the chief suspect in the bombings Tuesday. And they've come up with some things. They've conducted preemptive covert operations to stop some of his planned terrorist attacks over the last 3 years under authority that was given first by President Clinton and now by President Bush. But they did not get bin Laden, and another, I guess, part of this fast-moving story, as you would say, is they have intelligence now that shows that the camps in Afghanistan where bin Laden and his lieutenants have operated and trained people are now virtually empty, that lots of the terrorist training camps around the Middle East are empty. They've been evacuated. And even Saddam Hussein is moving lots of equipment, apparently, in anticipation of a possible strike against him or in some related way. So everyone on the other side of this is hunkering down. Clearly, we're preparing some sort of military operation at some point, I think, you know, many days, if not more, down the line. And if everyone's hiding and kind of out of it, it's going to be very difficult. And as one of the officials said, we have a hell of a targeting problem. Who do you hit and how? And obviously the U.S. has to respond to this in some major way. And if you can't throw a punch in the dark.
That has not worked in the past, obviously. There have been strikes ordered during the Clinton administration that did not take out Osama bin Laden. There was some question about the appropriateness of targets in the past. But if you look at Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan, there are lots of places, Bob, for Osama bin Laden and his colleagues to hide for a long, long time.
I think that's exactly part of the problem. And so if you try to step back from this a little bit, the ability to retaliate and respond in a dramatic and forceful way, as the administration has made very clear they intend to do, you have to have really good intelligence. If you go back to the Gulf War 10 years ago, in a way, it was the perfect situation. You knew who the target was, Saddam's military, which was occupying Kuwait. It was very visible. In this case, everything's invisible.
All right, thanks very much, Robert Woodward, Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. You can read it on WashingtonPost.com tonight or read it in the editions tomorrow morning. And joining us now from Washington is NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, there is another risk involved in, there are lots of risks in any military operation, but another risk in this kind of a military operation, and that is that once we begin military ops, Americans around the world will be at risk for counterstrikes by these terrorist cells.
Exactly right. This is a continuing risk, but what you saw today from U.S. officials is a determination and an acknowledgement that this is going to be a long, multi-year, sustained campaign. Now, what Bob Woodward just reported is very interesting, because I was talking to a top official a few hours ago and asked whether he thought that bin Laden could have already escaped, because I was hearing reports that he was already on the move. He said, we do not believe that he's crossed the border of Afghanistan. We would know that. They're getting cooperation from a number of those border states, and they're telling me tonight that they're, for the first time, getting real information, real intelligence sharing from Pakistan, and you know how important that is. This after conversations not only with the Prime Minister, between the Prime Minister and Colin Powell, but more specific working conversations between Pakistan's intelligence chief and other officials, including Richard Armitage at the State Department today, and similar counterpart conversations in Islamabad between U.S. and Pakistani officials. Now, if bin Laden has in fact left his training camps already, as Bob is reporting, and as I'm beginning to pick up information about, this is typical of his method of operation. He warns in advance of a terror attack and then disappears, as he did last time. One other quick point, we're seeing a report on the Associated Press now with Philippines President confirming that there has been a raid in Manila. Manila is one of the outposts that has been very strong for bin Laden. That was where Ramzi Youssef and others involved in the World Trade Center bombing hid out, and that's where there were also connections to the embassy bombings.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell in Washington tonight. We've had our first statement from President Jimmy Carter. He was speaking tonight in Atlanta at Emory University. He said that punitive action must be taken, but he warns the Americans not to lash out at Arab people. He said he has been in contact with President Bush. He supports all the hard decisions that he's having to make during this tragic time. President Jimmy Carter has some painful firsthand knowledge of what it's like to deal with Islamic radicals. It was, of course, during his administration that the Americans were taken hostage in Iran. Joining us now from the Pentagon with an update is NBC's Jim Eklashevsky, who's part of our NBC Terrorism Task Force. Jim, they've been saying at the Pentagon that it could be a sustained military operation. That does not mean that next Monday we put troops in a combat area and keep them there for the next 6 months or so. It could very well mean that the ramp up, so to speak, to some kind of combat action could take several months.
Well, part of the discussion going on between military planners and the White House is precisely what do we do and how quickly. There is no indication yet, Tom, that there's any huge logistical movement of either troops or equipment, planes, that logistical tail that you absolutely need for any kind of sustained military strike. There is one quarter within the administration that thinks you can't wait too long to launch some kind of strike. Otherwise, Americans' anger and support for that kind of military operation could diminish over a period of time. So there's a feeling that they may have to do something dramatic very shortly, very soon, and then follow that up with a more sustained military operation. Tom?
All right, Jim, we do have some news to report tonight from Capitol Hill. There has been a small hitch in the bipartisan unity that has been so evident to everyone since Tuesday morning. Congressional and White House negotiators have determined that they will be unable to agree on legislative language tonight for the emergency spending bill in time for passage this evening. The president had asked for $20 billion. Congress said, no, we're going to give you $40 billion, $20 billion for what you need and $20 billion for New York. They will attempt to get together again tomorrow morning and pass it. Essentially, some in Congress are balking at the White House proposed language. because many feel the White House is asking Congress to give up too much of its constitutionally mandated power of the purse, and that the president is simply asking for a blank check. So this is important because you'll remember in times past, especially during the Tonkin Gulf, when the Congress gave Lyndon Johnson another kind of blank check and where that led us. Let's go now to NBC's Ann Thompson, who is in Lower Manhattan. Ann?
Tom, the people who are up there behind me digging at the site, they're not only police and firemen from here in New York City and from across the country, but there are many volunteers, one of whom is Tony Ortiz. Tony, you've been up there. You tell me you've been doing a lot of digging by hand. Why is that?
Well, we found some of the airplane seats, and when you come to find something like that, you really got to dig very carefully because there may be some bodies there. We found some clothing. We started digging basically with our hands and with the debris that we find around.
Have you found anyone alive?
No, not yet.
Tony, thank you very much. That's the latest from up there, Tom. On day 3, while they found those 3 firefighters who got caught in the rubble today, they didn't find anyone from Tuesday's blast. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Ann Thompson. Tuesday, the pictures told the story. Since then, it's been the voices, of course, the eyewitnesses who lived through the horror, telling us about those haunting moments from which they may never fully recover. Here's Dateline's Victoria Corderi.
Today, New Yorkers woke to realize they were still living the astonishing nightmare.
You want to go down there and dig out through the rubble, but you don't know what to do. You don't know where, you feel so helpless because there's nothing in your power that you can physically do.
In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks, there is an unsettling quiet on the streets and an air of perseverance from people looking for loved ones.
Any information that you have, just to their whereabouts, their last whereabouts.
To legions of rescue workers seeking any sign of survival.
Civilians in there, volunteers, a lot of people helping. Everybody's doing their part.
Supposedly one of our guys is still alive down there, and they're trying to get him out.
Some who lived through those moments of what seemed like Armageddon fought to control their emotions.
I was on the 24th floor, and the first plane hit, and the building rocked to the right and back. And I opened the door of the conference room, and I saw the plane go by, and people falling.
Jimmy Vasquenza works for Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield in what was the second tower of the World Trade Center. He fled to the stairs with his co-workers until they reached the vicinity of the 16th floor.
You know, there was just a traffic jam of people trying to get down.
But then, saviors.
Firemen started coming through, and they let us down. Company 22 in New York City, freaking heroes. Not one of them had fear in their eye.
Jimmy pressed on to reach the street.
We got down to the bottom in the plaza. There was bodies everywhere. They were all on fire and broken. It was just the most horrific thing you've ever seen in your life.
So many on the ground saw unthinkable images.
It looked like a bomb had gone off.
Harry Crosby was on his way to work when the planes hit the World Trade Center. He says what he saw was a life-changing experience.
People were jumping in pairs and threes, in groups. It was devastating. People weren't jumping for safety. I think they were jumping because they had 2 choices: to stay and endure probably a harsher end or take a leap. I'm sure they had no choice, and they jumped.
Wendy Silva was evacuating when the second plane hit her building, the impact throwing her to the ground.
I knew at that point that I probably wasn't going to live, is what I thought. And I kept thinking, I'm not ready to die. I don't want to die right now. We walked as quickly as we could down the stairs, and I remember just counting the floors and knowing that each floor I was closer to living.
I thought the building was going over. The building starts to rock, smoke starts billowing up, and that's when just sheer terror.
Dan Hoff also was crammed into a stairwell trying to get out, not realizing until he hit the street that his fate might have been much different.
If they had hit the World Trade Center 2 first, I would have been evaporated. I'd be dead. And I'm here now because of that 18 minutes that the time difference bought me. I mean, you never realize how fragile life is until you can measure it in minutes.
So many survivors are wondering how it was they were spared, whether by minutes or movement or sheer happenstance. One of the most incredible stories we learned of is that of Patrick Andre, who works for an investment banking firm.
I'm standing holding the door, and then suddenly there's a huge explosion.
He was on the 71st floor of the North Tower when he heard the explosion hit the South Tower. Patrick lived through the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, so he wasted no time in herding all of his co-workers to the exit. His hand was on the door when the second plane tore through the windows on his floor, shearing the building in half.
Flames coming to my left, smoke both sides, my left and the right, and my right side, and the ceiling caving in.
Perhaps because Patrick was already at the exit, he was able to escape the colliding plane that passed right by him. Meanwhile, Patrick's wife, Michelle, working in uptown Manhattan, was frantic.
When I heard from one parent that the number 2 building had been hit and that it had collapsed and everyone was dead. At that point, I started crying.
Patrick Andre made it to daylight when so many others did not. But after surviving 2 brushes with terrorism, he says he's not going back to a building that size again.
2 times is enough. I don't think I need to have a 3rd time.
Part of the agony that continues to plague so many is the not knowing. Who survived? Who did this? Why? But those are greater questions to be answered in time. For now, there are only small blessings for people like Jimmy Vescenza, who finally was able to make it out of the war zone that is Lower Manhattan and back to the loving embrace of family.
Everybody was lined up trying to hitchhike out of the tunnel. It was like, you know, and this guy pulled up in a pickup truck and drove me all the way to the ferry, and I got home. And I'm home now.
Tomorrow will be a National Day of Remembrance and Mourning. There will be a memorial service at noon tomorrow in Washington, attended, of course, by President George W. Bush, and he has invited all the living former presidents to join him there. Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton will certainly be joining him, and President Ford very likely as well. And then the president will come to New York City. We don't know yet whether he'll be able to tour on the ground the site of the collapsed World Trade Center. We'll have continuing coverage for the rest of this evening. Forrest Sawyer will be here in just a moment or so. I'll be back with you at 11:30 Eastern Time. And of course, a reminder that many of your local stations will be carrying their news next. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you in a bit.
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America under siege.
Good evening, everyone. I am Brian Martin. Just hours after 3 major airports opened today, police say a man carrying a false pilot's ID has been arrested at Kennedy Airport. Authorities are currently questioning him right now. Meanwhile, new video tonight to show you from New York. Officials say the Millennium Building is now in danger of collapsing after Tuesday's attacks. But that's not stopping workers, and they continue to sift through huge piles of rubble looking for any sign of life. So far, 94 people are confirmed dead. More than 4,700 people remain missing at this hour. In Washington tonight, fire erupted once again at the Pentagon. Flames burned for a moment on top of the pancaked floors of the building before firefighters put them out quickly, and the death toll continues to rise there. Officials now say that 200 people have died, including a 3-star Army general. News 10 NBC's Brett Davidson is in Washington, D.C. He'll join us with more up-to-the-minute information in just a few minutes. Some stranded passengers waiting to get back home may be arriving at the Rochester International Airport tonight. 4 incoming flights are expected to land there this evening. Now, this is the 3rd day the airport has been closed. Earlier today, the Monroe County Bomb Squad was called in to investigate a suspicious car. Fortunately, they found no explosives. FAA officials have yet to give authorization to reopen the airport after tougher security procedures have been installed all across the nation.
And then we found out, well, I was supposed to come home last night, had a 6 o'clock flight that arrived back here, and ended up having to keep the rental car and drive back from Detroit. Got home about midnight last night.
There has been an outpouring of support from citizens all across the country, as well as here in Rochester. Wendy Wright is live in Irondequoit, where the owners of one business are trying to make a difference. Wendy?
Well, Brian, Amon's Farm Market here on East Ridge Road in Irondequoit is trying to make a difference in the lives of some of the youngest victims of this terrible tragedy. They are trying to help the children who lost parents who are heroic. Tonight, folks show up at Amon's Farm Market with money in hand, not to spend here, but to donate to the suffering. They are placing money in a jar, money that will help the children of the firefighters who died, trying to save victims in the World Trade Center. Shane Olney brings his 2 young boys and gives money.
Oh, there hasn't been a minute I haven't stopped thinking about those guys that are trapped underneath there.
5-year-old Nevin knows why there's a need.
Because the bad guy knocked down the people that the people and the firemen are helping.
Here at Amon's, there's a display with a firefighter's helmet and boots and an American flag flagging the attention of passers-by. Why the fire boots and the fire hat? Well, because 3 members of the Amon family are or were firefighters for their careers, including the former chief of the Ridge Culver Fire Department, Bill Amon.
Could happen to any fire department. It's always a worry.
Bill's son is a firefighter. His daughter-in-law, Patty Amon, and mother of 2, is organizing this effort.
I could be in the same position tomorrow, tonight, next week, a year from now. My husband could be gone. And how would I support them? And there are a lot of moms that don't have husbands anymore with a lot of little kids, and they're going to need some help.
Patty Amon realizes it may just be a drop in the bucket, but she hopes it makes a difference.
Those children need to be supported later on in their lives. A lot of them are small. They need to think about education and just basic housing and clothes and anything else a little kid needs growing up. And I know this isn't going to fix it. I only intend to try to help it.
Now keep in mind they are only going to collect money here, not supplies. Amon's Farm Market does open at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning if you'd like to come over and contribute. They're located here on East Ridge Road in Irondequoit. Reporting live from the Farm Market, Wendy Wright, News 10 NBC.
Well, the community does not have to remain quiet, and tonight many people came forward to speak out about their thoughts, their concerns, their fears. A panel of political, educational, and religious leaders gathered at Nazareth College to answer questions for members of the public. WHEC-TV and radio carried the community talk live, calling it Rochester Unites. WHEC leaders say they're trying to help Rochester heal after these tragic events.
I don't think people are able to really think or talk about much else this week, and if this is a way that people can perhaps get some of their feelings out and get some comfort, then we hope tonight will be a good thing for the whole community.
I'm here just to show support for the community, and most of all because we're all Americans, all in the same boat, and we need to show solidarity. So I think it's important to show unity, and there is strength in numbers, and I do believe that.
Among those on the panel, Bishop Matthew Clark, Rabbi Lawrence Kodak, and representatives from the Red Cross, State Police, and more. Local churches are being asked to ring their bells tomorrow at noon. It's a show of faith to remember victims of the attacks and help encourage rescue workers. They'll ring their bells in harmony for 5 minutes. Many area churches will also be holding prayer services tomorrow. For more information on that, log on to our website at 10nbc.com. All Monroe County office buildings will be closed tomorrow for 2 hours in observance of the day of prayer. All non-essential county workers will be released from work from noon until 2 p.m. Police officers and other essential workers will work normal hours. President Bush is expected to be in New York City tomorrow to experience the devastation firsthand. Earlier today, the president spoke with New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and Governor George Pataki. He then became very emotional when he spoke to reporters about saving ourselves from terrorism.
I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment, but this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
Tonight, the number of local people with ties to the tragedy continues to rise. Navy Commander William Donovan of Nunde worked in the Pentagon. He's listed as unaccounted for. We found out Joanne Sircone of Greece has a cousin who is missing. He's Phil Petty, a New York City firefighter who was one of the first on the scene. Joanne says Phil's unit was sent into the Marriott Hotel right next to the World Trade Center.
Well, my cousin's a great guy. He is very dedicated to what he does. He loves people, and that's why he became a fireman. Ironically, his brother is also a fireman. He, too, was there. He did not go into the buildings, but he has been there on the search looking for his brother as well as all the others.
We've also learned Jan Waxman of Parrington lost one of her best friends, Phil Rosenzweig, a 1977 graduate of RIT, was on American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston that crashed into the World Trade Center. He and his family lived in the Boston area. Jan says she and her husband are best friends with the Rosenzweigs. They met when they lived near Boston.
And he was very proud of his alma mater. And as I said, when I visited my last visit to Boston, I went to the RIT bookstore and I picked up some T-shirts and sweatshirts, and they were touched. It was just a big smile on Phil's face.
And we know that Jeremy Glick, a 1993 graduate of the University of Rochester, was also on the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. Tonight, he is being called a hero. Glick's wife says he called her by cell phone while on the plane. He told her that he and other passengers on board the plane were going to rush the hijackers.
He thought in his mind that, well, we're going to die, but we're not going to let anyone else die from this.
We may learn more tomorrow about the roles Glick and other passengers played on United Flight 93. Investigators found the plane's black box today. I hope it will give some answers to the many questions as to what happened on board. Tonight, thousands of people in Pennsylvania gathered for a statewide memorial service. Together, they prayed for those who perished, those who remained trapped, victims' families, and our country itself. A team of archaeologists are helping out authorities in Pennsylvania. They're trying to preserve evidence at the crash site where United Flight 93 went down. The plane's impact was so great, most of the evidence is buried under the soil. Investigators are still going through the rubble looking for more clues as to what happened. An emotional scene in New York City today as firefighters remember their fallen brothers and sisters. An impromptu memorial has been set up for the firefighters who died while trying to rescue others. The memorial is surrounded by flowers and American flags left by well-wishers and fellow firefighters. Some uplifting news tonight. 2 firefighters were rescued after being trapped in the rubble. One firefighter describes how he found the trapped fireman.
The ice up and down. Just tell us what happened. What happened today, sir?
All I did, I put my hand in and I felt the guy's hand, and that's all I knew was that I just kind of got in shock and went down, and then they're the men right down there. They're the guys that are doing it right now. I'm not the hero here.
One San Francisco man holds out hope that his wife will be found okay. Melissa Hughes called her husband Sean just 16 minutes after the first plane crashed into the World Trade Center. Sean didn't hear the message. He was asleep. Melissa was trapped on the building's 101st floor.
Sean, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. A plane hit the building or a bomb went off. We don't know, but there's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always. Bye.
The first thing I did, the natural thing, was after I spoke with her father, was to turn on the TV. Immediately I saw the North Tower billowing smoke, and you can only imagine my thoughts and fears.
The two have been married for a little over a year. Melissa Hughes was in the World Trade Center attending a financial technology conference. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., fire erupted on the pancaked roof of the Pentagon. Firefighters were able to get that out quickly, but across the nation's capital, security remains tight tonight. Brett Davidson joins us from Washington, D.C. with the very latest.
Good evening from Washington, D.C. It's hard to believe that during this time of crisis in the nation's capital that there are people out there that would disrupt the important duties of rescue crews and lawmakers with bomb threats, but that has been the case repeatedly throughout the day. Earlier this evening, Capitol Hill was evacuated after a suspicious package was noticed. Vice President Cheney was ushered out and flown to Camp David for safety purposes. This all came as Congress was working on a draft to give the president broad powers to use force against the attackers.
After the week we've had both in New York and in Washington at the Pentagon, that people now do pay attention to those bells when it's time to evacuate.
At the Pentagon today, several bomb threats didn't deter urban rescue teams from sifting through the concrete destruction, although little hope remains of finding survivors. Among the missing, Navy Commander William Donovan Jr. of Nunde, New York.
The rescue workers obviously are still very hopeful, and we continue to want them to be hopeful. But in reality, we're in the modes and operations that we're taking is it's more of a recovery phase.
It is time to identify those perpetrators as soon as we can and go after them. I think that that justice through retaliation is something that my communities are telling me that's what needs to be done, and that's what we're going to do.
Security remains very tight in the heart of the Capitol, especially around the treasured monuments and buildings. A city desperate to return to some sense of normalcy, still very much on edge. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Brett Davidson, News 10 NBC.
U.S. troops have been deployed to New York City. The troops are going to be there to help in the search and rescue efforts, as well as assisting in traffic and crowd control. State troopers from our area are also part of the security efforts. Let's go now live to Shelley Rubando. She joins us live from New York City. Shelley?
That's right, Brian, and we're hearing that there are security issues going on again tonight in New York. They've arrested a man at JFK Airport for carrying a false pilot's ID. They've also been questioning 5 other people at other local area airports. We'll keep you updated on that. Right now, I'm in Lower Manhattan. We're about 4 blocks from here. They're starting to close down the streets that lead to the World Trade Center area. And as you said before, some of those areas being patrolled by state troopers from Rochester. They spent most of the day IDing people who are trying to get through, either getting to work or trying to get back to their apartments. We saw them searching back seats and trunks, looking for anything out of the ordinary. One of the Rochester troopers told me what it was like to actually walk through the wreckage.
I can't really describe it because I can't find the words that would actually describe what you look at when you're there. It's devastating. And when you're standing there, you go through a wide range of emotions, from sadness and despair to outrage and extreme anger that something like this could happen, and you feel for the victims and their families. Primarily, we're on the outside perimeter, working with New York City PD, traffic control points, not allowing vehicles past a certain point.
And the closer you get, Brian, the more smoke there is. So they're handing out these face masks that actually go over your nose and your mouth to try to filter out some of the particles from the debris in the air. We'll keep you posted on all the continuing developments from New York City. Reporting live from Manhattan, Shelley Rubando, News 10 NBC.
Okay, Shelley, thank you very much for that live report. Well, hundreds of you have been writing emails to the station to express your thoughts, your concerns during this very difficult time. Laura from Australia writes, as an Australian with a very close friend living and working in New York, I was devastated by what has been going on. What is amazing is how upset the whole of Australia is, regardless of whether they know someone involved or not. Please know that you are all in our thoughts. Love one another and try and stay strong. Donna writes, my thoughts, prayers, and tears go out to all the victims, families, and friends, and for those of us who are left with many confusing and unanswered questions. I believe that Thanksgiving Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, and Grandparents' Day will now hold new meanings for each and every one of us. We must stand strong and united together. Take the time to talk and hug your family and friends today. Select your words with true sincerity, honesty, and love, and open your hearts to one another without fear of what tomorrow may bring. Live for today and learn from yesterday. Donna writes, I wonder what the Statue of Liberty would say overlooking the whole nightmare. This is Debbie. I am sure she would have a tear coming down her cheek for America and her children.
Now, bringing you Western New York's most advanced forecasting technology, here's meteorologist Richard McCullough in the 10 NBC Weather Lab.
Cloudy skies, a few showers around Rochester and all of western New York at this 11 o'clock hour. Some chillier air is coming in the next 12 to 24 hours. We'll detail that forecast for you, show you how long that chilly air will stick around our area. Let's go to our 10 NBC Weather Lab triple Doppler, though. Show you exactly where that rain is falling at this hour. In greater Rochester, we have that light shower activity. You notice the clouds and a few spritzes out there if you were out and about this evening. And also back toward the wine country, the Finger Lakes, and the lower southern tier, you see those showers as well. The heavier activity at this hour, just south of Syracuse and north of Binghamton, there is a front that came through earlier today, and that's where the activity is mainly at this time. Now, there will be some lake effect showers as well that will be developing tonight and tomorrow morning because of that very chilly air that's moving across the lakes, and we'll be detailing that for you as well. So tonight and tomorrow morning, expect a few showers across the area. And right now, we're looking at temperatures down into the 50s here in greater Rochester. Here at the Weather Lab, we're down to 57 degrees. Let me show you the numbers for this day, this Thursday. 67 was all we could get up to today, officially at the airport. 58 was the low during the course of the day. Now, here's your forecast for your Friday. Expect some showers as you start today. You might want to wear a jacket as you start today as well. A little chilly as you start. Cooler for your Friday, and then a mix of clouds and sunshine by the afternoon. And high temperatures tomorrow, only near 59, 60 degrees by tomorrow afternoon. So definitely a chill in the air, a fall chill in the air tomorrow as well. Here's how we look today. This is our Metro Skycam. It caught the really beautiful clouds out there today. We had a collection of those stratocumulus clouds across the region. Lots of patches of blue out there as well as the chilly air is filtering in across our region. Here's what's happening nationally. This is the front that came across the area and the showers associated with that front. Now, there will be some shower activity around the Pittsburgh area, western portions of Pennsylvania into the next 12 to 24 hours. Also down in Manhattan for the rescue and the research, the area around that part of the disaster. They'll have some showers in the next 12 to 24 hours as well. But then the weekend, I think, will be dry, so it won't hamper, the weather won't be a factor as far as hampering any rescue and searching areas down in New York City. But look at the areas right here. Temperatures are well into the 40s, and that's what we'll be tapping into in the next 12 to 24 hours here. So it's really going to get chilly behind that front. Temperatures right now locally in the 50s, 58 degrees here in Rochester. Up in Canada, we're looking at temperatures in the 50s as well. Right now at the airport, 58 degrees. A few scattered showers right now. Winds out of the north-northeast at about 17 miles per hour. Here's your forecast for your Friday. Sun and clouds. A cooler day tomorrow. You might start off with a few scattered showers as you start your day for Friday, but other than that, it's just going to be a fall-like day with temperatures only in the upper 50s. Now, for the overnight, cloudy, breezy. We'll see some showers, and we'll drop down to around 45 degrees in the overnight period. And your forecast for tomorrow, we'll check that out as well. Today, I said 70. We actually saw 67 degrees, and tomorrow, I say we'll see a high temperature of 59. Here's your forecast for tomorrow and into the weekend. Temperatures close to 60 tomorrow and back up into the 60s into Saturday and Sunday, and more sunshine coming our way, and back into the 70s by Monday and Tuesday of next week.
Just a little taste of fall for a little bit.
Definitely.
Okay, Richard, thank you. The Rochester Red Cross still needs your help. Medical reporter Robin DeWitt has the latest in tonight's medical checkup.
The Rochester Red Cross wants to thank all of those people who have come out to donate blood. In fact, late this afternoon, the White House released a statement asking Americans to continue donating blood. It was a steady pace, and the lines were not as long today at the Prince Street Donation Center, but at times the wait could be up to an hour and a half. So far, 1,100 units of blood from the Rochester area have been sent to the New York City area. The Red Cross says they still need all blood types and hope that people will continue to give, but officials are asking that you phone ahead to make an appointment.
That will allow people to make scheduled appointments and help us staff some of these drives a little better. But we still are encouraging the public to please come out and donate by scheduling their appointment because we still do need all blood types.
We have two numbers for you tonight to make an appointment and find out about the nearest blood donation center near you. We have the 1-800-GIVE-LIFE number, but due to the overwhelming response, the Red Cross has opened up a second phone line, and that is 1-888-840-1373. There's help for those people having difficulty dealing with Tuesday's tragedy. Lifeline is a crisis hotline that offers confidential help to those people in need. Director Bob Bond says there has been a growing number of people who are calling in for support and referral services. Lifeline is a health association operation. Our local office is also taking calls from a 1-800 number to help those people in the New York City area, since Lifeline services there have been so overwhelmed. Bond says they're receiving calls from people who normally wouldn't call in for support.
Even the most well-adjusted, high-functioning people are deeply affected by this, and are really shaken. And it's a very normal reaction. I mean, everyone should know that that is a very normal reaction to what's going on.
Lifeline is open 24 hours a day. You can call 275-5151, and the TTY number is 275-2700. Bond says right after Tuesday's tragedy, the phones were quiet, but as people absorbed the news, they began to call, wanting to know how they can help, how they can talk to their children, and how to deal with their own sense of loss.
Wegmans is also providing customers with a way to help out. You can scan in your donation right in the checkout line. The normal donation is $1, but some people are pitching in $20, $50, even $100. The money goes directly to help with relief efforts in New York City and Washington, D.C.
Why wouldn't you want to help at least a little bit? You know, living this distance away, there's not a lot we can do, so that would be just a small thing.
Whether you can give $1 or 10, it all collectively will go directly to the Red Cross Disaster Relief Fund to help the victims of this tragedy and the victims of other tragedies.
Did you want to donate to the Red Cross Relief?
Wegmans will continue taking donations for 2 weeks. Well, even our country's smallest citizens are taking action to help. Students at Buckman Heights Elementary School in Greece are collecting pennies for the American Red Cross. A third grader started this campaign after watching the news on television. Jared Sangiorgi wanted to help out, especially since people helped his school out when it was a target of arson just a few months ago.
So we can help the injured people and all kinds of people that injured, killed, buildings that were struck or fell because they're weak.
Jared and his friends have already collected more than 4,000 pennies. Some local banks are also pitching in to assist tonight. Key Bank is accepting donations at all of its centers on behalf of the Salvation Army. And HSBC has set up a fund for the American Red Cross disaster relief effort at all of its branches. HSBC Bank will also match donations up to $1,000. One way everyone feels they can support our country right now, displaying the red, white, and blue. Houses and businesses all across the country and here in Rochester display the American flag tonight. A local store called Stars and Stripes has sold thousands of handheld flags. Chase Pitkin and other hardware stores have sold out. People all over are encouraging Americans to display the flag during this time of crisis.
But there is, I'm so proud to be an American, and I just feel it's so important that we show our patriotism right now.
It's hard to know what to do, and this is something we all can do, is fly our flag and show our support.
You can also buy American flags and ribbons at Home Depot stores. All money from the flag sales there will go to the Salvation Army. Very good way to show your support. Get a flag.
Absolutely.
Rich
The national anthem was being played tonight at high school games, and a lot of tears in the crowd were being told. Sports, of course, is a healthy outlet for many people, but it is way down on the priority list right now and will remain that way through the weekend, at least in the professional ranks. There will be no pro football this weekend. The Bills-Miami game and 14 other games have been called off by the NFL in the wake of Tuesday's attacks in New York and Washington. The Redskins, meanwhile, have established a relief fund. Owner Dan Snyder kicked in the first $250,000. Rick Hager was at Bills practice when word came in.
Bills president Tom Donahoe took the call from the league. Sunday's game had been canceled.
Along with Mr. Wilson, I applaud the decision by the commissioner and the league. This was the right decision to make. Obviously, at some point, we all have to return to our lives and the things that we do, but nobody seems to be sure at this time what that point actually is.
Earlier this week, nearly all the players said they did not want to play this weekend. In fact, there is some belief that players across the league were ready to apply pressure to stop the games if they had not been canceled.
I know the Jets and the Giants weren't going to play. I think Washington wasn't going to play, so it was good that they didn't put us in the situation where they told us to play, and then we'd have to vote as players whether we wanted to or not.
How are you going to play in the Meadowlands
when you got people under rubble, I mean, that's just not very sensitive. That's why I say the NFL, you know, put the business aside. They really showed a personal side today, I think, and I think they made a really good decision.
The Bills will practice tomorrow morning. Then the players and staff will hold a prayer service in memory of the lives lost on Tuesday. The team will then have the weekend off. Rick Hager, News 10 NBC.
The Big Ten, Big 12, and SEC have postponed all football games this weekend, and the NCAA today donated $5 million to disaster relief. Baseball has postponed its games through Sunday, but it will not affect the races or Barry Bonds' home run chase. The regular season will be extended to make up all games, and that will push the World Series into November. NASCAR has postponed its New Hampshire race until November 23rd. Spencer Speedway has canceled racing for tomorrow. And the LPGA joined the PGA and canceled its tournament in Portland. High school officials have decided to keep the games going. Section 5 President Denny Freeze says it's important for kids to have an outlet for their pain. Mark Gruba attended a soccer game tonight in Webster.
For the first time since Tuesday, a reason to cheer, to step away from the TV and celebrate our children, our future.
You take care of your kids, you support your kids. It's all part of being in America, and, you know, this is part of it, a soccer game.
Webster and Rush Henrietta playing to a 1-1 tie, but playing, as teams all across Section 5 are doing. Those involved tonight think it's the right decision.
I've got family that was inside the World Trade Center, and they were lucky enough to get out. And I've got friends who are firemen down there that I grew up with. And everybody I've spoken to, my family, says the same thing. You have to move on.
Our coach talked to us about talking about what happened in New York City and stuff like that, but we decided to concentrate mostly on our game and what's happening.
Everyone's pretty scared, shaken up, but I don't know if it directly affected. I don't think it affected how we played, though. I think we'd play harder, if not anything.
These young athletes, like the rest of us, dealing with a variety of emotions. Patty Schwartz, whose daughter plays for Webster, captured the prevailing sentiment.
I think everybody feels that way. You know, we all want our kids home, and we all want to just hug them. That's what we're talking about at work. Let's go home and just hug the kids.
In the end, there seemed to be a consensus tonight here in Webster among parents, coaches, and players that playing the game tonight and that playing games in Section 5 is the right thing to do. If anything, they're a welcome distraction from the tragic events of this week. Mark Ruba, News 10, NBC.
Thanks, Mark. And every sport in Section 5 is being asked to devote 2 minutes at halftime of all games this weekend to remember those who died and those who are suffering. That's it.
Kind of an outlet for them.
Yes.
All right, Rich, thanks. Let's take a quick look now at tonight's winning lottery numbers. If we have those, we can put those up. No lottery numbers. Let's talk about the weekend really quick with Richard.
Cooler tomorrow. Temperatures in the upper 50s, but sunshine prevails Saturday and Sunday in the 60s as well.
Okay, looks pretty good. Thanks. And thank you very much for being with us tonight. Stay tuned for complete local coverage on News 10 Today, starting at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
This is an NBC News special report. Attack on America. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. We're now coming to the end of day 3 in the attack on America. And in New York City and at the Pentagon, hope is rapidly fading away that any life is left in the rubble of the World Trade Center or in the Pentagon building. But the rescue and recovery crews continue to work through the night at both sites. Firemen were rescued today here in New York City, but it turns out that they had been trapped in the collapse of another building as they were attempting to rescue those people who were caught on Tuesday. At the same time, there are other significant developments in New York, in Washington, and around the world. First of all, Army reservists will likely be called to active duty as the president describes this as the first war of the 21st century, the focus, he says, of his administration, this war on terrorism. And at the Pentagon, they're telling the American public that they should be prepared for a sustained military operation. At the same time, there are other developments tonight. We want to share those with you as well. A black box was recovered from that hijacked airliner that crashed in Pennsylvania. And at the there are other developments at airports here in New York City tonight. All 3 major airports have been shut down after briefly opening. because several people were detained at JFK Airport. In fact, they may have been arrested. They're certainly being questioned right now. Let's go to NBC's Pete Williams for the latest on that. Pete?
Well, Tom, throughout the day, the federal assessment of how serious the situation was in New York has been constantly changing. At first, we were told this was a minor problem, possibly some immigration difficulties. Then there were reports that these people had knives. Then we were told that wasn't the case. Let us say what the to be now. A federal official tonight calls this a very significant development. Here's our understanding. 2 separate groups, for a total of 10 people, 2 separate groups tried to board 2 transcontinental airplanes tonight, late this afternoon, one around 5, one around 7. One at LaGuardia Airport, just across from Manhattan, one at JFK Airport. And both were stopped from eventually getting on those planes, and of course, then air traffic was halted in the area. Now, we're told that members of both of these groups tried to board the airplanes using falsified documents, claiming to be, for example, airline pilots or employees of the airport. We are also told that authorities got on to these people because their names matched names on a watch list of suspected terrorist sympathizers. So a system that has been developed here to keep track of potential terrorist sympathizers may have headed off a very serious problem. Now, the immediate question it raises is, was this another attempt or 2 more attempts to hijack domestic airliners and stage more suicide attacks? That is a question federal officials cannot answer tonight. But after first saying this didn't appear to be very significant, now they say it is. They're obviously very worried about this. It's obvious they're worried about it from the fact that they closed down the New York airports. No conclusions from federal officials tonight. We're going to undoubtedly hear about it tomorrow. Now, the 3 regional airports that were closed were Newark and then LaGuardia and JFK. We don't believe that anything happened at Newark, but out of an abundance of caution, it was closed down as well because of, obviously, its proximity to the New York City area. So, Tom, we're going to hear a lot more about this tomorrow. I think this is about what we're going to hear about it tonight. It's about as far as officials want to go now as they assess whether this was just some people who sympathized with potentially with the hijackers getting on these planes, or someone else determined to stage yet another terrorist attack so soon after the ones on Tuesday. No answer to that question tonight. A very active investigation going on, questioning still going on at the scene there tonight of these 10 people, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams. Today, a source in the intelligence community told NBC's Robert Windrum, one of our investigative producers here, that in fact that would be in keeping with the pattern of Osama bin Laden, if in fact he's the mastermind behind all of this. After he bombed the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, there was an attempt on some facilities in the middle of Albania as well. He likes to have a 1-2 punch from time to time. That's been part of the pattern of his behavior. Let's go to downtown Manhattan now, not too far from the World Trade Center, where NBC's Ann Thompson is standing by. And sadly, still no sign of life in that rubble.
That's so true, Tom. Day 3, and no one is rescued from Tuesday's attack on this day, at least so far. And because of that, hope here is getting harder and harder to sustain. But today there were several incidents that illustrate just the dangers that these rescuers face as they try to free anyone, dead or alive, in that rubble. Earlier today, 3 firefighters got caught in the rubble. They were trapped, and eventually they were saved. My colleague Ashley Banfield talked to one man who freed one of those firefighters.
This is what it's all about. It's all about helping everybody, you know. It's sad.
You told me that the signatures that are on your bandana are of...
The signatures on my bandana are for guys that I fought with within the last 3 days. And 2 of them are dead. My heart goes out.
Will you be going back in?
I don't know. Maybe. But this is hell.
Can I get some water, please? Can someone give me some water, please?
I've never seen anything like it. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. But we're all brothers. We all got to stick together. I wear my bandana because it represents the country of freedom. And that's how I am. I'm a very patriotic man. And I always will be. And that's about it.
And the resilience of those firefighters, Tom, is just one of the amazing stories. I've talked to several people who have been up there, and they say, you know, the firefighters, they're exhausted. They're working 12-hour days. They're working under just tremendous pressure, horrendous conditions. They've lost so many of their own. And every time they think they might even find there's a hint of life, they say they all spring to and they get right in there and they forget how tired they are, and all they can think about is trying to find someone who might be alive in that rubble. And when they don't find someone alive, they find a body. There is a sense of reverence, if you will. They work slower, they work more carefully, trying to be as delicate as they can, because they know they're taking out someone who was an innocent victim, someone who was loved by someone and someone's family, who's left a tremendous hole in someone's family. Now, a couple of other things that they're worried about tonight back at the site. First, the stability of the buildings remains a major concern, particularly the remains of the South Tower, and they are particularly concerned about the southern wall of that South Tower, and fear that it would collapse earlier today sent rescuers running out of there. Also, earlier today, they also thought they heard a woman tapping in that area, but I talked to one worker who came out tonight, and he said that turned out just to be nothing. Now, there has been some, as we talk about the dangers facing the relief workers, one of the things that some of them are doing, because they know how precarious the situation is in there, they are actually writing on their arms their names, their social security numbers, and their phone numbers in the event that they too get trapped. It is a very difficult job, but they are going through it tonight with a grim determination, knowing that it may take days and even weeks before it's finished. Tom?
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Ann Thompson tonight in Lower Manhattan. Again, so discouraging. No news of any recovery of any of the victims from Tuesday's explosion, although some firemen who were trapped earlier today in their own rescue efforts were pulled out today. And we do expect that President Bush will be visiting the site tomorrow, either by helicopter or on the ground. 3 days ago, the skyline of Lower Manhattan looked like this, with the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center looming over everything. Then the collapses began, not only the Twin Towers, but two others, the Marriott Hotel and No. 7 World Trade Center as well. But that was not the end of it. It still is not the end of it. With surrounding buildings such as Liberty Plaza and 5 World Trade Center in grave danger of collapse, and at least 7 other structures have been severely or partially damaged, including the U.S. Custom House and 3 World Financial Center. To understand, these are some of the most important buildings in the financial district in Lower Manhattan. It's in an area that has been undergoing a tremendous revitalization in recent years. A huge area of downtown stretching from the Brooklyn Bridge all the way west to the Hudson River and south to the tip of Manhattan is being patrolled by the National Guard tonight. Thousands are without electricity or phone service. Only residents of the area are being permitted in, and only on foot. They hope to open the New York Stock Exchange on Monday, but they can't be certain that they can get a full complement of workers through that devastated area. Let's go to Washington now, and NBC's Andrea Mitchell. It's been a very busy day on the diplomatic front as well, Andrea.
It certainly has. U.S. officials are reporting tonight, Tom, that they are getting significant help from Pakistan. Now, it is a little too early to say whether all of this pressure on Pakistan is finally going to deliver what they want, Osama bin Laden. But they say they're getting real intelligence now out of Pakistan and some progress on what they are demanding, which we have learned includes closing the borders with Afghanistan, which would, of course, try to seal in bin Laden, who is believed to be somewhere in Afghanistan, but not in the training camps where he had been spotted some days and weeks ago, and also cutting off fuel supply to Afghanistan to squeeze that country even more. Now, all of this, as we are hearing today, a declaration from Colin Powell, from Paul Wolfowitz, the Deputy Defense Secretary, and from George W. Bush, that this is all-out war. This is the first war of the 21st century, and they want Osama bin Laden, and on top of that, they want to wrap up, to roll up, in a sustained campaign, the entire global terror network. Out of the ashes of disaster, a U.S. determination to wage a crusade against terror on every front. But the enemy is elusive, mysterious, and dedicated, leading the dispossessed of the Islamic world in a holy war against the United States, with 21st century technology and medieval ferocity.
You're dealing with a very, very skilled, knowledgeable, thinking enemy, and we just have to think better than them, think faster than them, and be cleverer than them.
It's a hatred rooted in Osama bin Laden's fury after U.S. troops rescued his native Saudi Arabia from Saddam Hussein. To bin Laden, the American-led coalition and its Western culture defiled the holiest sites in the Muslim world. Further enraged by American support for Israel, U.S. indictments say bin Laden first targeted American troops in Somalia, then Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and now suicide hijackings in the United States.
They're willing to die. They're not only willing to die, they're willing to spend years studying something, knowing that the end result is not to become an airline pilot or to make a lot of money flying people around the world, but to crash into a building.
How does a civilized nation following the rule of law win a fight with fanatics? Today, a former president and past CIA director says we have to fight dirty, without one arm tied behind our backs.
And if you're going to infiltrate some cell somewhere, or a terrorist cell, you have to deal with people that are willing to betray their country, people that are willing to betray their friends, people that want money or other things, and it's not pleasant.
The first challenge, infiltrating a closed society, bin Laden's secret training camps, a tribal culture of family members.
We've got to go after the training camps. We've got to go after and eradicate the very idea of training people for terrorism in the world.
And in a world where bin Laden uses the latest technology to hide his secret commands, how much of a barrier are preventive steps like banning curbside baggage check-in?
They will try to find other areas where we are vulnerable, particularly in such areas as cyber vulnerability, chemical and biological weapons.
And if we've learned anything about bin Laden, what we know is that he will strike again. First threaten, then strike, disappear, and yet strike again. And this may be well borne out by what Pete Williams was just reporting. We reported earlier today that officials felt that there were others out there who had possibly pilot training and might try the same thing, that they had not yet all been wrapped up. And it seems as though it's possible, from what Pete Williams was reporting, that there are some bin Laden associates still at loose here in the United States, Tom.
Thank you very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. And Bob Woodward of the Washington Post is reporting in tomorrow morning's edition that the CIA has concluded that all of the terrorist training camps within Afghanistan now have been vacated, and those people are on the move to somewhere. He's also reporting the CIA has determined that Saddam Hussein in Iraq is beefing up his military component, perhaps even in the southern fly zone. So there are a number of operations underway tonight in anticipation of some kind of an American military operation. I'm joined now by former Secretary of State Warren Christopher from the Bill Clinton administration, who also served Jimmy Carter in the State Department and was a principal negotiator during the Iran hostage crisis. Mr. Secretary, let's begin with the Iran hostage crisis. That will remind everyone that there are other risks involved in going after these Islamic radicals who operate terrorist camps, because other Americans then around the world could be put in some kind of peril, couldn't they?
Yes, Tom, there are a lot of very ugly groups around the world, and they're not just in Afghanistan. They're in other Middle Eastern countries. Had a good deal of experience with that. The Middle Eastern leaders quite often say there's some radicals down on our borders that we can't quite control. That's not good enough anymore. We just can't accept that.
What is your assessment of how the Bush administration has been doing so far? NATO has invoked Article 5, an attack on the United States is an attack on every member of NATO. Colin Powell is talking to Pakistan. Are they making all the right moves in your judgment?
Yes, I think they're being very effective, Tom. I think that this is the time to support the president, not to criticize him. I thought that the moves he made on last Tuesday were very understandable. Having been there myself, I remember many times when you simply didn't know what was going to happen next and you had to be prudent. Tom, I think it's good to remember tonight that our immediate priority is to comfort the grieving and those who have been wounded. That's lots of grief out here in California. Those planes were on their way out here. And we also must act to prevent a recurrence, and that's not to be taken for granted. But after that, we face some very tough decisions ahead.
Did you ever consider during your years as Secretary of State launching a war against terrorism? Because after all, the Clinton administration had to deal with Osama bin Laden as well.
Well, we certainly considered retaliatory responses. I remember, Tom, when there was an assassination attempt against President Bush's father in Kuwait, and we studied that at great length, even though the assassination attempt failed, and we retaliated by sending missile strikes, cruise missile strikes into Iraq. But this time I think we need to have a sustained and effective response. But at the beginning of these issues, Tom, is what degree of certainty will we require before we determine that some foreign nation is behind this? They're either supporting it or harboring the terrorists. We've made good progress today. This is what the FBI is good at, is finding out who the people were who were on those aircraft and who their supporters were in the United States. But the next step is very difficult. There probably can be no absolute certainty. We must find some standard. I don't know of a better standard than concluding beyond reasonable doubt that some foreign nation is behind the various actions that have been taken in the United States.
It was during the Clinton administration and during the Carter administration that the United States put a prohibition on assassinations as a tool of policy, and also greatly restricted the kinds of people that we could recruit to work for us. Now, a number of people, including former President George Bush, the 41st, are saying we've got to play by their rules. We've got to lift those prohibitions. Do you agree with that?
There's no question we're in an entirely new situation. Last Tuesday changed a lot of the rules, a lot of the situation. I don't speak to any particular change, but clearly we have to go after them with everything that we have, and I think that the United States will show that we're up to the task.
All right, thank you very much. Former Secretary of State Warren Christopher speaking to us tonight from California. One of America's most highly regarded experts on the Middle East is former Saudi Ambassador Richard Murphy. He was the United States ambassador to Saudi Arabia. He also served as the Assistant Secretary of State for the Far East and for South Asia. I think I've got that whole title correct. He's now with the Council of Foreign Relations. Mr. Murphy, tonight, as you look at what could happen in that part of the world, what are your largest concerns?
The largest concern I have is that we not close out all possible roads for the investigation. I'm uneasy when I hear talk about the mastermind Osama bin Laden, when I hear him described as manipulating everything in terms of worldwide terrorism, lest we miss other possible culprits in this. But beyond that, I'm worried about the targets. What will there be to hit? You heard the phrase, let's wipe out the training camps, but the training camps we then hear have been fully evacuated already, and they were pretty primitive affairs, we understand.
And we have to have, as Secretary of State Warren Christopher said, irrefutable evidence that he was being harbored by some nation as well before we strike back against, say, Afghanistan, or you could set off a chain reaction.
Well, the harboring by Afghanistan has been pretty clear. And the Taliban government has apparently passed word back that if it is presented evidence of his culpability, then they would consider extraditing him. They've also said they didn't think he had the capability to pull off nearly as big an action as that striking New York and Washington.
Mr. Ambassador, Israel seems to be more defiant than ever tonight. Benjamin Netanyahu said in effect to me earlier today, he's the former Israeli Prime Minister, see, we told you so. You have no choice but to go after the flat tops, as he described them, the carrier bases for terrorism throughout the Middle East. Is it the United States' interest to try to get Israel and the PLO simultaneously now to stand down for a while?
I don't think they're going to stand down, Tom. They have their own quarrel. We would like very much to see them get back into political discussions, but the policy that Israel has followed of targeted killings hasn't stopped others from coming into the action as suicide bombers, so there are replacements out there.
What do you think they're thinking in your old post in Saudi Arabia tonight? That country was not very helpful to the United States when we had the loss of almost 20 American servicemen in the Khobar Towers attack.
They're never going to talk about how helpful they are. They avoid any such public discussions, but in Saudi Arabia and Egypt there is full awareness that they are very much a target, bit as much a target for efforts like those inspired by Osama bin Laden as is Washington.
What do you think they're thinking in Tehran, in Iran tonight?
I was struck by the very strong statement that President Khatami made condemning the attacks. Now, he didn't have to go, in my opinion, as far as that, and I welcome that. He's got internal opposition over the issue of just how much to move towards the United States. We've seen that situation almost paralyzed these last couple of years, but it was a strong statement, and I assume very much welcomed by Washington.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Former Saudi Ambassador Richard Murphy, now with the Council of Foreign Relations, as I said earlier, one of America's most highly regarded experts on that part of the world. It was a long and difficult day in the towers of power in Washington, D.C., in the Oval Office, as well as at the State Department. We want to show you what President Bush had to say when reporters were ushered in as he called the New York political leaders, Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki, and then described his own emotions and what he's been going through this week.
I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
George W. Bush today, obviously very emotional in the Oval Office. We're joined now by Doris Kearns-Goodwin, a presidential historian of great note in this country, and Daniel Altman from the New York Times editorial board. Doris, let's begin with you. It's a big leap from Austin, Texas, and being governor of Texas to the Oval Office and facing an international crisis, as the president himself described it, the first war of the 21st century.
Oh, there's no question about that. But I think what the president has going for him, number one, is a leadership team that is pretty experienced in foreign policy. Luckily, that's the greatest strength of that leadership team. And presidents somehow, when they get into these situations, it's not that he has to grow into Franklin Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln overnight. He's going to have day by day, the more exposure, the more he's in the center. I think there's a capacity. We've seen that happen in other leaders. I mean, remember Lincoln, he had had only one undistinguished term in the Congress, 2 failed Senate races, 1 year of formal schooling. Nobody thought he could become the person he became. Under the fire, under the stress, he had those internal qualities. We just got to hope that Mr. Bush has them as well.
Daniel Altman, you're a young member of the New York Times editorial board. What was your reaction when you watched the president today in that very emotional appearance?
Well, you know, I think people of my generation are really looking to him and people of his generation and that of some of his cabinet for leadership now and for resolve. It's a defining tragedy for us, the way Pearl Harbor and the JFK assassination were for previous generations. We never had something like this. We were always the ones forging into the future by programming VCRs and learning new software and things like that. And now we're forced to look back at the older generation for some solace and comfort and leadership. And seeing the president today, it was good that I think that he loosened up a little bit and showed a little more of his feeling, because that helped us to relate to him.
I remember when I was a young reporter covering the assassination of John F. Kennedy, I had the conscious thought that this was the age of the loss of my age of innocence. Did you have that feeling on Tuesday?
Absolutely. I think, I'm not sure innocence is exactly the right word, but I think that my generation, despite enduring the Oklahoma City bombing and Columbine, really thought that we were invincible and, more than that, sort of untouchable, living in this country, the lone superpower at the height of its power, and now that illusion has been taken away from us.
And Doris, what about the role of the President, not just as the Commander-in-Chief and the President of the United States, but he also is, to use the current phrase, kind of our chief caregiver?
No, that's so true. I mean, I think, you know, what's interesting to realize, though, is that we look at that great generation of World War II and Roosevelt's leadership at the end of the war and realize that it all came out all right. It's important to remember that in 1940, when Roosevelt looked out at our country, he might have worried about that generation as well. We were 18th in military power. We were producing a lot of washing machines, but we had very little tanks, weapons, ships, and planes. We only became 17th when Holland surrendered to Germany. A lot of our reservists were overweight. They hadn't been trained. We had more horses than we had tanks. We were really unprepared for World War II. But somehow what the leader has going for him is not only his own qualities, but the incalculable strength of a democracy at a time when it feels threatened. We're seeing that every day when we see people talking, the extraordinary feelings the firefighters have, the ordinary people have. When a democracy can mass that together, it gives the presidency, not only does he have to be a caregiver for those people, but he can generate that incredible energy that's there.
And Daniel Altman, before Tuesday, did you and your friends think very much about the role of the military services in our lives?
Well, not as much as we would have had we been born earlier, I think. I mean, I can point a little bit to what you have done in chronicling the greatest generation as a very different era, but I hope that some of that solidarity and feeling of robustness and resolve translates to our generation now. And I also hope that we share a little bit of that with the rest of the world. While millions of people died in Central Africa, we barely felt a ripple here, and I hope that we take a little more notice of those things now.
What would you like to see the American people do in the coming weeks that would give you some comfort, Daniel?
Well, I'd like to see people try and do the things that they do on a daily basis, participate in society and in the economy. We need confidence now more than anything else. It's a little bit difficult because, unlike after Pearl Harbor, we don't know what comes next. I think the path after Pearl Harbor was pretty obvious. We weren't really prepared, but we knew what we had to do. Now that's not so much the case, but we need to have confidence, no matter how irrational it may seem, that we can beat this. I think that we really are a superpower, and people need to have that in their mind and be proud of this country. I've been very proud as a member of the New York Newspaper Guild this week, seeing people really put it all on the line 24 hours a day. And I think more of those examples will help us all to go on.
Thank you so much, Daniel Altman of the New York Times editorial board, and my colleague and friend Doris Kearns-Goodwin for being with us tonight. I hope that we'll be speaking with you as well in the coming days as we continue to cover the story. Jim Olson was at Kennedy Airport tonight when there was an altercation at TWA. As Pete Williams has been reporting, it turns out to be a more serious incident than we may have first realized. Some people were taken into custody carrying false pilot IDs, and they were trying to get through. Mr. Olson, just describe for us what you witnessed.
Well, Tom, let me first correct you. It was actually an American Airlines flight that I was on, just to clarify that, bound for Los Angeles. We were supposed to leave at 4, sat on the tarmac for about 3 hours. And after they cleared us, after the captain came on and said we were cleared for takeoff, basically about half a dozen to a dozen stormtroopers or SWAT team burst through the back door of the plane, had us put our heads down in crash position, and they dragged out at least one, and I heard later on approximately 3 potential terrorists.
My God, what were you thinking at that moment?
It was surreal. I mean, it was like a scene from a movie. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and you see these things on the studios, but you never think that it's real. So it sort of took a couple minutes for it to set in that it was real. And then when you see SWAT team members with big guns and big bullets right at your side, it sort of really hits home.
Did you understand at the outset that these were the good guys, not the bad guys, that were storming into the airplane?
Yeah, they were clearly on our side, and they clearly had the force on their side to do whatever's done, and they actually did it with a lot of precision, and it was all very professional, and the crew of the airline, and I commend everyone involved. It was all very laser precision, but it was very, very scary for everyone on board.
Describe the person that they took off the airplane, if you can.
Couldn't really. We heard a lot of a lot of kicking and screaming and bustling. There were some accents that I couldn't really make out, some foreign language, but clearly they took somebody off board. We were in sort of a crash position, so you couldn't really see things clearly other than at least a half dozen people sort of storm by you.
And where was this person sitting in the plane?
They were in the front section of coach.
And they did take off more than one, you think?
I know they took off at least one, and then we were talking to some folks afterwards in the luggage carousel area that they were sitting right next to the folks that were extracted, and they said there were 2 women and 1 gentleman of Middle Eastern descent that they think were pulled off.
Okay. Any indication tonight from American Airlines when you may be able to resume your flight?
I've been trying to get home to Los Angeles for 3 or 4 days now. Certainly, this is a very sad time, and there are a lot of other people out there that have a lot bigger concerns than me right now, but I hope to be home in the next day or 2.
Jim Olson, thank you very much for coming in and sharing with us tonight the story. He was on a flight American Airlines designated to go from New York Kennedy Airport out to Los Angeles when suddenly a SWAT team entered and carted off possibly 2 or 3 people that are being questioned tonight. Some people did try to board a plane, according to Pete Williams, and they were carrying false pilot identification, but they were not wearing pilots' uniforms, as had been previously reported, and there has been no confiscation of weapons. So we're trying to sort all of that out. Pete is hearing, however, from his sources at the highest levels of the federal law enforcement agencies that this is a more serious incident than we had first realized. NBC's Kerry Sanders is in Florida. He has been our detective on the run down there all this week. He's been tracking 2 of the suspects in the hijacking as they have gone from flight training facility to flight training facility and even to strip-tease clubs, it now appears. Kerry, what's the latest for us?
Well, we followed some paperwork today of the suspected pilot, suicide pilots, and was able to get a visa on one of them, Mohammed Atta, who had a tourist visa when he entered the country. And we also were able to get another record, which is actually a driver's license, which says that he has an Egyptian driver's license. Now, he was here in the United States with a friend learning to fly planes, that friend from the United Arab Emirates.
23-year-old Marwan al-Shahi, one of the suspected suicide pilots, hiding in plain view on Florida's Gulf Coast for more than 7 months, living with 33-year-old Mohammed Atta, another suspected suicide pilot. After both earned their commercial flight ratings on this twin-engine plane, NBC News has learned they came to Miami, paying $1,500 in cash to sit at the controls of a Boeing 727 flight simulator, similar to this one. Henry George, the instructor, telling the FBI the duo spent about 6 hours at the controls.
I feel violated, raped, whatever. Here I have a skill that I'm very proud of, that I think we're good at, passing on to other pilots wanting to become competent pilots. And here we provided that kind of expertise to the lowest of mankind.
FBI agents also looking at a Microsoft Flight Simulator program available at any software store. The program includes a path through Lower Manhattan by the World Trade Center towers. Flown off course, an eerie picture. The simulated 757 flies directly into Trade Tower number 1. Veteran commercial airline pilot Alex Garmendia using the program for the first time today. He says after hours on this software, a novice pilot without experience in a jet would still lack the skills to do much of the controls.
But it surely shows you the cockpit layout.
In FBI custody tonight, Anand Bukhari, a material witness reportedly cooperating with investigators. His Vero Beach home raided by agents. His brother dying in a mid-air collision in Florida while learning to fly here. That accident 1 year ago to the day of the hijackings. The FBI's leads in Florida growing exponentially. FBI agents visiting a strip club in Daytona Beach just hours before the hijackings 3 Middle Eastern men there hinted at the violence to come.
The gentleman actually making the statement, well, America's going to see blood and wait till tomorrow.
Now, the FBI is at yet another home in Deerfield Beach, which is north of Fort Lauderdale, serving yet another search warrant tonight. But there is a little bit of a difficulty that is beginning to develop in Florida. So many people are looking for suspicious activity that the police are receiving calls. I think the people say they saw somebody suspicious, looked like they were from the Middle East. A Middle Eastern man looked suspicious, and the police now are having some difficulty trying to separate what are true leads and just people calling in thinking that they're helping, when the police are saying, you know, just because somebody's ethnic background may be from the Middle East does not make them a suspect in anything. So police warning people to really be cautious. Obviously they want calls, but they don't want just to have people calling in because they see somebody based on their ethnicity.
Thanks very much, NBC's Kerry Sanders. Try to get some sleep tonight. You got another long day tomorrow.
We want to bring you up to date to get the full perspective on where we stand now. This is day 3. We've asked Dateline's Stone Phillips to take us kind of from dawn to dusk on this day of the attack on America.
Morning, 48 hours after the world exploded. 48 hours that seem like forever. New York City struggles to get back on its feet. For many, today is the first day back on the job, the first attempt at returning to life as it was. But how is that even possible?
Nothing could be quite normal, but this seems much more normal than it was yesterday.
There's no energy. People are just kind of like sleepwalking.
For tens of thousands of workers here, there is simply no office to go to. Their buildings reduced to rubble or crumbling masonry. The Twin Towers, gone. The 47-story tower at 7 World Trade Center, toppled. The 54-story tower at 1 Liberty Plaza, 3 blocks from the Trade Center, disintegrating. And numerous other buildings uninhabitable. In the tangled, still smoldering wreckage of the Trade Center towers, emergency teams continue their around-the-clock work. At about 10 a.m., the reason they are driving themselves to exhaustion.
I believe that there's a good possibility that there's people in that building that are alive, and that's why we are treating this as a rescue effort still. This is not a recovery. We are trying to get in every possible void, every possible area that we can to try to see if there are people that we can save.
But this morning's statistics threaten to overwhelm the flickering hopes of finding many alive amidst the tons of debris. New York Mayor Giuliani.
We now have a count of 94 bodies that have been recovered, 46 of which have been identified. We have the gruesome and horrible situation that in many cases we recover only parts of bodies, and we have 70 in that category.
Another number speaks graphically to the carnage. To hold all those pieces of the human wreckage, the mayor tells reporters that the city has waiting 30,000 body bags. And then there is the list of the missing.
We have 4,763 people on the missing persons list. That's a list that's as inclusive as we can make it. It includes the plane itself, the manifest. It includes people that have been identified to us by family members.
And all over the city, pictures handed out by desperate families. This is Tim Stout, a father of 3 who was working on the 103rd floor of the North Tower, one of 680 missing from his company alone. Michael Lepore's office was on the 97th floor. Missing from his firm, another 700. Their families are hoping to find them, even if it's in a hospital bed. That's where Arthur Del Bianco's family found him, his leg broken, his respect unbounded for the courage of the rescuers.
The firemen were phenomenal. They're true heroes. They were there, they went back in over and over again. Even after the first building started coming down, those guys went back inside. They went back inside.
Do you have the sense that there are still people underground?
I want to believe that there's still people alive.
Transportation Secretary Norm Mineta, 10:30 this morning. The first official word that planes will soon be flying again.
Effective 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today, our national airspace system will reopen to commercial aviation.
But Secretary Mineta says there will be new precautions.
From this day forward, we are operating with tightened security.
More extensive passenger screening, an end to curbside check-in, more parking restrictions, possible armed marshals on flights, less convenience, but more safety.
Again, I strongly urge all passengers to allow plenty of time to deal with the heightened security procedures and also to exercise patience with airport and airline employees and security personnel.
11 a.m. President Bush calls New York, commending officials there and telling them he will visit the stricken city tomorrow.
I weep and mourn with America. I'm going to a hospital right after this to comfort families. I wish I could comfort every single family whose lives have been affected. But make no mistake about it, my resolve is steady and strong about winning this war that has been declared on America. It's a new kind of war. And I understand it's a new kind of war. And this government will adjust. And this government will call others to join us to make sure this act, these acts, the people who conducted these acts and those who harbor them are held accountable for their actions.
After the call, the president turns to reporters with a message for America, its allies, and its enemies.
The nation must understand this is now the focus of my administration. We will be very much engaged in domestic policy, of course. I look forward to working with Congress on a variety of issues. But now that war has been declared on us, we will lead the world to victory.
From the commander-in-chief, determination and emotion.
Could you give us a sense as to what kind of prayers you are thinking and where your heart is for yourself as you work on that?
I think about myself right now. I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment, but this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
By early afternoon, new details on the massive investigation into the attacks, with word from the Attorney General that the public is pitching in.
The website, which was opened virtually immediately after the crisis, has received more than 22,700 suggested tips.
With leads pouring in, investigators say they are now able to reconstruct the terrorist operation with names and numbers.
The total number of hijackers on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18. 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each.
And there's new information from Boston, where investigators say the hijackers boarded their planes with help from a local terrorist cell. NBC's Chris Hansen.
A ramp pass was found in a rental car here at Logan Airport that has been linked to 2 of the hijacked suspects. Now, a ramp pass, as its name suggests, is a pass that gives someone access to restricted areas of the airport. Now, this indicates 2 things. 1, that the suspects were casing out the airport in the days before the hijacking, and 2, that perhaps the hijacked suspects had inside help here at the airport.
By mid-afternoon, disturbing news. U.S. officials tell NBC's Andrea Mitchell that other potential hijackers tied in with Tuesday's terrorist operation are still out there.
So we know that there were 18 who went down with those 4 planes, but what I'm now being told is that there were more trained pilots.
Before the day is out, government sources tell NBC News they have concluded that Osama bin Laden is directly responsible for the attacks. Also late today, a major development. Recovered and on its way to Washington, the black box from the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. As evening approaches, the impact of the terrorist attacks is clear. It's been a day of bomb scares and evacuations at New York's Grand Central Station, at Penn Station, LaGuardia Airport, and Rockefeller Center. In Washington, the U.S. Capitol is evacuated, even as congressmen are being briefed on the terrorist attacks. And word that as a precautionary measure, Vice President Cheney is being moved out of Washington to Camp David.
At State Line Stone Phillips tonight. New York City has always had a love affair with its firefighters. Those people come off the streets of New York City and they are the very personification of can-do in the can-do city. And that strength and those bonds have only been strengthened this week. More than 200 firemen are missing in the rubble of the World Trade Center. And their fellow firemen and firewomen, for that matter, are down there 24/7 trying to find them and pull them out. We've asked NBC's Pat Dawson to go to a New York City firehouse and tell us about the people who live and serve there.
In a small group of firehouses in New York, the loss and the grief is staggering.
They looked up at this building, they saw the fire. I would imagine the first thing they could have looked up and said, this thing could collapse. And then they knew there were people in, they went in anyway.
Tuesday morning, Engine 54 and Ladder 9 were among the first to respond, along with the 3 other companies of Battalion 9, Engine 40, Ladder 35, and Engine 23. And Battalion 9 appears to have paid a terrible price. Of the 37 men who raced to the World Trade Center in the first wave, 36 are missing.
Yeah, I keep praying. That's all I can do.
Jim Cooney has been at the firehouse that calls itself the pride of Midtown for 20 years. Tuesday morning, he was off. He didn't get to the World Trade Center until hours later.
I asked them who's lost. They told me, and a little bit of me died there.
Paul Gill's family lives with the anguish of not knowing his fate. His sister watched as the disaster unfolded.
I saw the second tower collapse, and that's when my heart just crushed, because that's when I knew he was there.
His is only one of 350 tragic stories. Stories of firefighters going off duty who jumped on the trucks anyway, or the father and son, one a 30-year vet, one a rookie, both missing. Citywide, the toll of firefighters is now above 350. They are officially listed as missing, and while there's still hope, it is a slender hope at best.
You have to believe. I do. You know, if there's a way for them to survive, these guys will find it.
For the firefighters, who are known here as New York's bravest, fear is a silent partner on every job. But duty speaks in a louder, more demanding voice. Tuesday morning, duty spoke very loudly indeed.
The guys that are buried under the rubble or trapped somewhere, if they can talk to us, if we can hear them from the rubble, they would say, take care of my family, guys. There's people here. Don't worry about it. Just make sure my family's okay.
Fitting last words from men for whom duty was their final act of bravery. Pat Dawson, NBC News, New York.
No one knows more about New York City firemen than one of their own, Dennis Smith, who is the best-selling author of a book called The Report from Engine Company 84, and he has been on duty at the World Trade Center and joins us tonight. Dennis, first of all, tell us what it's like down there at Ground Zero.
Tom, it is, I think, an environment it's very controlled. It seems, if you were looking at it from the outside, it would seem sort of pandemonium, but everyone is doing something very site-specific. Everyone knows what they're doing. Every time a piece of steel is raised, there's a group of firefighters and police officers and EMTs and construction workers, steel workers. And they dig. First of all, they look for voids beneath that steel, and then they dig. And if they feel that there might be reason to get the dogs in, they get the dogs in, and the dogs come in and they search the scene. If the dogs respond in a certain way, then there's an extraordinary focus then in terms of digging out that particular part of the rubble.
Dennis, what is it about the bond among you firemen in New York City? You really are, in effect, a great brotherhood.
Well, you know, we've always been a great brotherhood, but this is unprecedented, this sort of loss. I don't think anybody realizes the stunning magnitude of this loss. And I think that down there, people are just very focused and very determined to try to get, as one of your firefighters said in this interview, if no one has the resolve and the determination to live as these firefighters, and if And if they're there, they'll still be alive. You know, there's a window of 4 or 5 days, and we still remain hopeful that there will be some survivors.
But aren't you struck by the magnitude of the task that lies before you? You had two 110-story towers collapse into an enormous pile of rubble, and it's going to be very dense and compacted.
You know, Tom, that idea never left me in the last 3 days as I was down there, that these buildings took 3 years to build, and here we are dismantling them bucket by bucket. And so far we are only in the middle of West Street, which is the, you know, street before the World Trade Towers. The work before us is extraordinary. I think that it will be weeks before we get any resolve to our, you know, feeling that we've accomplished our mission, whether in saving people or claiming people. And I think in the meantime, we as a nation have to go on. We have to go on and hope for the very best and try to help these families and try to help each other. As you were saying, it is a new world.
Dennis Smith, a very gifted author, a fireman, and as I know personally, also a very gifted artist. Dennis, I know that this has been a trial of your life, but thank you very much for coming by here tonight.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, thanks, Dennis Smith. Let's go now to NBC's Robert Hager and see if we can't get an update on what the situation is in the skies across America, and especially what's going on at these three major New York City area airports. Robert?
Well, they remain closed tonight, and a decision is going to be made in the morning about what to do about them. But there's a major story breaking here tonight. We can now confirm something first reported in the Washington Post this evening, that there's a plan to leave Washington's Reagan National Airport closed for an indefinite period. So in other words, as these airports open up one by one around the country, Reagan National is going to be left closed. And it's because of the extreme sensitivity of its location, which has always been a favorite for Congress people who use it all the time. But it's located, as you well know, right along the Potomac there, where you're very close to the White House, to the Pentagon, and to the Capitol itself. And so indefinite period has not been precisely defined, but it's going to be days, weeks. A spokesperson says it won't be permanent, but it's going to take a while. And in particular, I think what they have to figure out is what to do about these approach patterns, and particularly in light of what's going on. I mean, I think they want to be absolutely assured that everything is under control and that there's not the slightest indication that this is going to go forward before they think about using those approach lanes again. And then they're probably going to re-examine it and spend a good deal of time thinking about whether they should be redesigned or just precisely what to do. But that's just a major step. I mean, this is a big airport. They just put a lot of money into renovating it. As I say, it's been a favorite of Congress's. So that's a step not taken lightly. Tom?
And Bob, what are you hearing about the New York City airports? After all, they serve millions of travelers on an annual basis. Kennedy is closed, LaGuardia is closed, and so is Newark. Any chance that they'll open tomorrow early?
They say they're going to re-examine that issue in the morning, but the way it's been going tonight, maybe not, because, I mean, this whole restart has gotten off to an extremely shaky start. I mean, besides the situation there in New York, which is, again, a decision not taken lightly, as you say, so many people move through there. And tomorrow, where it really wouldn't affect that many tonight because they're just spooling up. But tomorrow, which is supposed to be a day where they're beginning to get back to some sense of normalcy, why a huge number of people would be expected to go through those airports. So that's a big decision to make. And again, it certainly wouldn't have been taken lightly to make that decision tonight.
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager. Before this terrorist attack on Tuesday morning, America's airline companies were struggling, as they always seem to be, in part because of the increased price of jet fuel, and many of them were facing very difficult labor situations. And it's pretty clear now that a number of them will likely not survive what amounts to an economic calamity for them tonight, as there is continuing interruption of air traffic in America. We want to give you a kind of update across the country now. Virginia Shaw of NBC News is at JFK. We have Kevin Tibbles at O'Hare in Chicago, and Dan Lothians at Los Angeles International Airport. Virginia, let's begin with you because you're at the hot spot tonight. Any chance that JFK will open tomorrow?
There certainly is a chance of that, Tom. I think that authorities are taking it day by day. As you heard Robert Hager mention, the 3 metropolitan airports in New York are closed, JFK, Newark, and LaGuardia. It appears security incidents are behind that. One man, we're told by authorities, is under arrest. They say he tried to get through airport security using a false pilot's ID, false pilot's identification. In addition to that, we're also told that up to 6 people were detained for questioning in New York airports. Here on site, there are FBI agents as well as members of the Terrorist Joint Task Force. And so while this is being sorted out as far as security concerns, I think that will determine what happens tomorrow for passengers. As you know, they were opened for a limited amount of time today, just a few hours for very few flights, and then shut down again after these incidents. Tom?
All right, thanks, Virginia Shaw at JFK. Kevin Tibbles in Chicago.
Well, Tom, as you know, this is the busiest airport in the nation. 2,700 flights take off from here every day. 250,000 usually pass through the doors. And as you can see this evening, it remains empty. There are some people lined up behind me, perhaps out of futility, trying to get flights out of here. One man just told me he's been here for 3 days and he's desperate to try to get back home to his family. As far as I can tell you now, this is about it, Tom. The sign is telling us that this airport is going to open now at 8 a.m. tomorrow vis-a-vis flights of United Airlines, which is based here. About a handful of American Airlines flights took off from this airport today, but no United flights. And there are going to be a number of changes, as we already mentioned, over the last couple of days. When the airport does open, there's going to be no curbside check-in. I've also noticed this evening that all of the automated sort of walk-in, walk-out, check-in, computerized services, those are all closed. And there are many police on the other sides of the barricades here. One of the features of O'Hare and many other airports in America over the past few years is that if you're going to meet a relative or whatever, arriving here at O'Hare, you could actually walk through and go right up to the gate. Well, that is now going to stop. The only people who are going to be able to go through to the gates of the aircraft who are people with legitimate boarding passes, and those people are going to be checked very closely. Tom?
Kevin Tibbles at O'Hare in Chicago. Dan Lothian's at Los Angeles International Airport to give us an update on the situation there. Dan?
Well, Tom, things out here are somewhat a little bit better. Flights have indeed started taking off. In fact, earlier today, officials at the airport told us that they expected about 40 flights would be taking off from the airport and about 60 or so flights would be arriving. We did check back with authorities earlier this evening and they told us they were not able to confirm if those numbers indeed did add up. But certainly some challenging days ahead for passengers as they come through this airport. As Bob Hager was mentioning, some of these key airports in New York City and certainly in Washington, D.C., there's trouble there. So any passenger that's trying to get to that area from Los Angeles will still have to face those major delays and those cancellations. And what we have found tonight, there's certainly a lot of frustration here. One woman came to us and told us that she had been stranded here in Los Angeles trying to get back to New York City. She keeps coming to the airport every time she comes here. She has a ticket. They tell her you will be getting on your flight. And by the time she gets here, she's told that that flight is canceled. She has to go back to her hotel. They're spending a lot of money. There's a lot of frustration. But then on the other hand, there are those passengers who are saying, we know that there are problems. We know that we will be facing some of these tougher restrictions at the airports. But then again, safety is a major issue now, and they can deal with it. Tom?
Dan Lothian at Los Angeles International Airport. And I'm joined now by David Stempler, who's the president of the Air Travelers Association. What's your major concern tonight with this new reality in air travel in America for your members of your association, Mr. Stempler?
Oh, it's quite significant, Tom. You know, this is the loss of innocence, as you mentioned with your earlier guest. It's a whole change in the way we're going to travel in this country. Americans have gotten used to quick, convenient travel, and that's going to run right in the face of high security, and it's going to be quite a different situation for passengers from now on.
Do we know whether, in fact, there are going to be sky marshals on board some of these planes, armed people in plain clothes?
Well, I'm not sure we're necessarily supposed to release this number, but there are really now existing only a handful of sky marshals, probably in the nature of 24. So unless they start bringing in some other forces from some other places, we don't have those to go around. There are some, 10 to 15,000 flights in this country domestically every day, and there certainly aren't enough to go around unless we bring in some other forces.
Airlines have been trying for some time to crack down on carry-on luggage. It's a real war between travelers and the airlines because no one wants to check a bag and then run the risk of losing it or standing at the carousel for a long, long time. But carry-on luggage, that era may be coming to a close, or certainly it'll be diminished.
Well, look, the basic problem here that we have, Tom, is that we have a deficient security system. We have a system that was really set up to stop a hijacking threat to Cuba with people using metal weapons. And we really haven't improved on that much. We have terrible gaps, terrible holes in our security systems, which these terrorists exploited. And unfortunately, Secretary Mineta came with what he says is advanced security provisions, but there was really not much that dealt with this threat that was created by the terrorists. The only thing was the change in not having any knives on the planes. Everything else having to do with not checking at curbside and other kinds of things have to do with the bomb threat, which was not involved here. So there really has not been an improvement in the security situation since Tuesday morning.
All right, thanks very much, David Stempler from the Air Travelers Association.
Good to be with you.
There were so many businesses, of course, in the World Trade Center, 110 stories of 2 towers. It was the heartbeat in many ways of the American financial system. One company had 1,000 workers there, and 700 are missing tonight. Here's Dateline's Bob McEwen.
Here and abroad, they were the ultimate symbols of America and American business. The Twin Towers, home to some of the giants of U.S. finance. You may well not know its name, but one of those companies is called Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald dominates the bond market. Last year, the firm did $50 trillion in business. But according to Chairman and CEO Howard Lutnick, what's made him most proud isn't its bottom line, but the kind of company it is.
We are a family. We are the tightest group of people. And we always have been a tight group of people. But you just don't know it. We did know it, but in this last couple of days, I mean, it's unbelievable.
And how long these past few days must have been for Howard Lutnick. In a catastrophe that's crushed an entire country, no one can have been hit harder than he has.
We have lost every single person who was in the office. We don't know of any, not a single one person getting down from the 101st to the 105th floors where our offices were, not a single person.
Incredibly, it was just over 48 hours ago that Cantor Fitzgerald was on top of the financial world and of the World Trade Center. The firm occupied 4 floors high up in the North Tower, from the 101st to the 105th. 1,000 employees, traders and executives, secretaries and support staff went to work there every day. But this Tuesday, CEO Howard Lutnick was going to be late. He didn't want to miss his son's first day in kindergarten.
I mean, I wasn't there because I dropped my baby off at school for my 5-year-old's first day of school, but that means that I get there late. That means I get to be alive. And anybody who got there early doesn't get to. It's unthinkable.
Even without him, the day began as it often does, with a conference call between New York and the office in Los Angeles. At about 8:45, over the speakerphone, Cantor Fitzgerald employees on the West Coast heard someone in New York say, "I think a plane just hit us."
I got a call as I was leaving my son's school that there was, a plane hit the Trade Center. So we went right down at the top of the building, and I saw a lot of smoke, and I knew it was not good. And not good. And all I was saying on the way down is, it's not good. This is not good.
The first jetliner had smashed into the North Tower at about the 90th story, not far below where Cantor Fitzgerald's offices began, on the 101st. An inferno of jet fuel now rampaged upwards, consuming floor after floor.
It's unfathomable that everyone would die. It's not possible. Someone would get out. So all I wanted was to hear one person say they were on 101. Just one person who was on 101. People coming out of the building, and I grab them, and they're sort of like out of it. And I'd take them and say, what floor are you on? And I got all the police around that door, just shake people and say, what floor are you on? And they'd say 50. And I'd scream out there, I got 50, and a 60, and a 70. I got up to 91. Someone said they worked on the 91st floor, and they came down and they got out. And then the building collapsed. I don't have anybody. from anybody.
With people off on vacation or business trips, and those who simply got to work late, Lutnick now believes everyone who was in the office that day perished. About 700 in all.
There's 700 of my families. I can't say it. 700 of my families. 700. I'm just one, but they're all 700. There's so many of them. They all lost their son or their daughter. People come up to me and say, I only have one daughter. What do? There's too many. Too many. Too many.
Is there any...
That's Dateline's Bob McEwen, and the CEO of that company lost, in addition to all those other fellow workers, his own brother when the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center came down. So that's the situation for just one company. Just one company, and what happened there. Let's go to NBC's Ron Insana. Actually, he's CNBC's, but we claim him as one of our own as well. They're going to open the financial markets on Monday morning, Ron, and will they be operating at full capacity?
Indeed, Tom, the stock market will be open as declared by Richard Grasso, the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, earlier today. 9:30, the traditional opening time, is expected to bring people to the southern portion of Manhattan once again. Full capacity is an open question. There are still problems with power supplies in the area, still problems with telecommunications lines, and over the weekend, the New York Stock Exchange will be testing its various systems to make sure that the brokerage firms and other financial organizations that feed into the New York Stock Exchange can interconnect their systems so that trading can run smoothly and efficiently. There are additional questions as to what happens if indeed some of the other buildings that are in danger of collapsing should fall between now and Monday, and whether or not that will complicate the process of getting 3,000 people on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and 150,000 people back to work on Wall Street.
Ron, as you talk to business leaders and economists around the country, do you have any sense of the damage that has been done to the American economy as a result of this week?
Well, we have some numbers this evening with respect to specific sectors of the economy. The airline industry, for instance, as estimated by UBS Payne Weber, will lose from this event $2.1 billion. $4.4 billion for the year, the largest loss in the history of the airline industry. Insurance losses expected to total at least $20 billion, possibly more. The impact on travel and tourism is incalculable. The impact on consumer confidence also immeasurable at the moment. Most economists believe there will be some near-term retrenchment in the economy, Tom, but if this groundswell of patriotism, if people suddenly feel it is their duty to spend and live more normally than they might otherwise, the impact could be somewhat muted. We should also point out that the Federal Reserve has injected the U.S. economy in just the last 24 hours with $100 billion to make sure there is enough cash to get through this crisis. So again, the effects might be muted if the Fed follows up with an interest rate cut sometime between now and Monday morning as well.
All right, thank you very much. CNBC's Ron Insana, who's also a member of the NBC family. Let's go to NBC's Rahema Ellis, who has been reporting for us throughout the day and throughout this week from Midtown Manhattan and from downtown as well. Rahema?
Tom, I'm at 26 in Lexington on the east side. Behind me, the Armory. It's the grief center. Activity winding down now, but thousands of people have come here throughout the day to pass out flyers like this, pictures of their loved ones, and giving detailed information to emergency workers inside, hoping they'll be able to be reconnected to those who are missing. I'm struck by the saying that we are 6 degrees of separation. For the stories that I'm hearing of people who are trying to find their loved ones, they tell me that they know someone who knows someone else who is struck by this tragedy. It seems clear we are all in this together. It is a horror we now all share. In the days that followed, our lives have become strangely connected by the acts of terror at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. People like Monica O'Leary are connected to fate and timing that will live with them forever. On Monday, she lost her job in the Trade Center. On Tuesday, she lost her boyfriend and former co-workers.
On Monday afternoon, I found out I was laid off. And I kissed all of my colleagues goodbye. And now I'm thankful that I had a chance, that opportunity to kiss each one of them and tell each one of them how much they meant to me. They were my best friends, and they were my mentors.
In a park a mile away from Ground Zero, shocked New Yorkers wrote messages to missing friends and loved ones, expressing emotion that right now still has nowhere to go.
Everybody in the city knows somebody who works, or a friend of someone who works there. And we all hold our breath and wait and pray.
I'd spoken with my mother, and one of her best friend's daughter worked in the World Trade Center. She's 27 years old, 7 months pregnant. Her and her husband worked on the 91st floor, and they haven't heard anything from her.
They're holding their breath in England, too. Father David Smith watched the Trade Center crumble on TV and was jolted into the realization his cousin might have been inside.
So I emailed him, his brother, and some other friends of mine in the States, just to ask if they were all right. And about 11:30, I think it was, that same evening, his brother just contacted me with a little email. Richard missing. He was on floor 101. Please pray for him.
And in New York's bars and cafes, where news of the terror attacks has replaced sports on the TV screens, optimism about the missing is starting to fade.
And now today I opened up the Daily News and I saw my friend's father there. So in the Daily News says, under the missing and dead.
And everybody seems to be feeling this, even children. Some children who are only 6 years old, with first graders from a local school, they wanted to help out all of the thousands of people who've been standing around. And Tom, what they did was they made them sandwiches and they gave them the thing that they love best. It's peanut butter and jelly. This one even has a Hershey's Kiss inside. It's from Nicholas with a red heart on it and the words that say, be okay. Tom?
Raheem Ellis, thank you very much. PBJs are always comfort food, and especially when they come with M&Ms. By the way, the White House and congressional leaders tonight have come to an agreement on the language that they will use in a $40 billion emergency authorization bill, $20 billion to be used by the federal government and $20 billion to go to New York. So that's where we stand with all of that. Let's go to Robert Butterworth now. He's a well-known trauma psychologist, and he joins us from Burbank. We have been seeing a lot of Mr. Butterworth in recent years on television. Obviously, there's going to be a great immediate need for counseling. That's going on right here in New York right now. But what about the long-term effect of all of these images playing out across America, not just on children, but on adults as well, Mr. Butterworth?
Well, Tom, you know, this is an interesting situation because it used to be that post-traumatic stress was basically reliving a trauma that you experienced. And in order to really have the symptoms, you had to be there. You had to experience it. In this age of technology, all the people that are seeing these images, no matter where you are in America, over again and over again, of people, not only of the buildings toppling down, but of the loved ones walking the streets of New York with the pictures and saying, where are you? Or the 10-year-old in my wife's classroom that looks up to her and says, what did we do that made them so mad? So this is a long-term effect, and I know there are going to be a lot of therapists all over the country in the next few weeks working. But, you know, as years and years go on, as we know from natural disasters, this is not going to go away.
So communities and schools and community leaders will have to get involved in this as well. We just can't leave it to the therapy community.
Research shows that when a disaster hits a community, not only do people experience psychological symptoms, but divorce rates go up, rates of drug and alcohol abuse go up. Indeed, even domestic violence goes up. So in a sense, we're living in a community. And no matter what happens to that community, it really impacts all of us.
Mr. Butterworth, in America, we have kind of divided ourselves into so many pods. Can something good come out of this as well? Can this, in a way, become kind of positive connective tissue for America?
Well, isn't it sad, Tom, that, you know, it does take a crisis to bring us together? I mean, all across America. I mean, we're seeing people, as I'm coming here in Los Angeles, there are people with flags on their cars. I mean, people are all talking. We're having you know, everyone is talking about this. This is like an ongoing therapy session at every workplace. In a sense, I guess the sad part is that we need a common enemy, an external enemy, to bring us all together, you know, and it's done that.
It's hard to overstate the role that President Bush may be able to play as well in bringing the country together.
Well, when we saw that clip, and he was saying, he was talking just like the rest of us, and then the tears came in his eyes. I mean, we could all feel it, because it's not a question of words, it's a question of emotions. And we're all feeling something, and he's joining that. And I think that so far, he gets an A. He really has demonstrated those qualities that a leader needs to give us right now, and that's a sense of understanding, sympathy, and compassion.
Robert Butterworth, a trauma psychologist, and if ever a country needed a trauma psychologist, it's right now. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Butterworth.
Thank you.
Robert Butterworth. We've asked Coda Hotby of Dateline NBC to give us a report above and beyond the visual images that we're seeing.
I've always known that I have had a knack for being able to connect with people and a desire to kind of help humanity in some way. I had to use my talent and my knowledge to try and make a difference in this horrible tragedy.
On Tuesday morning, like thousands of other doctors, nurses, and medics who heeded the call to help the victims of the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, Nurse Teresa Thomas put on her scrubs and got to work.
I knew there may be limited time to get the supplies we needed if that someone should come through the door. We were ready.
But unlike the other people at this triage center, for Teresa, the work was personal.
I can imagine, though, that every time a victim walked in, or every time a stretcher came by, your mind had to be on just one person.
It was. I was searching for him.
Searching for Brian Novotny, her fiancé, a credit broker unlucky enough to have an office on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center.
You'll see maybe a haircut or a shirt. Sorry. I'm sorry. So, yeah, you're hoping that that really might be him.
For Teresa, it would be a day of waiting, searching, and hoping that Brian would emerge from the rubble. In effect, she would have to become two separate people that day. The devoted fiancé keeping hope alive that he would be okay, and the ultimate professional, a medic at the top of her game and ready for anything. For Teresa, that day started like so many before. The morning paper, a cup of coffee, but this time, a goodbye she would not forget.
He gave me a kiss on the cheek. And he always waved at the door. And he waved, I'll see you later.
As usual, Brian headed to the World Trade Center. Teresa was off to the hospital. But then, just after 9 in the morning, she heard the news. A plane had hit the World Trade Center, Brian's tower, just 14 floors below his office.
So I immediately ran back to my phone and attempted to dial.
But no one answered. She had no idea where Brian was. Then suddenly, she got word that his sister did get through to him on his cell phone. The news was bittersweet. Brian was alive, but trapped.
There was a kind of a sense of relief that she had actually spoken with him, and I was hopeful. If anyone was going to be okay, it was going to be him.
Even after the towers collapsed, she held out hope.
And then I started to think about what I could do, to try and get some control.
So, and the way to get control for you was to do what?
Was to try and help people.
She made her way to a triage center across town and waited for the wounded to arrive. But minutes passed, then hours, and few survivors appeared.
It must have been frustrating, I would imagine. You're waiting to help. You have everything there. Just bring us somebody.
We wanted somebody.
You, as a nurse, you had to stay focused.
I had to stay focused.
You had to keep your mind exactly on the task at hand.
That's right.
What were you afraid would happen if you didn't?
I think I'm afraid that I won't find that my hope will go away.
Before long, victims began to trickle in, and incredibly, despite her own fears about what might have happened to her fiancé, Teresa continued to work. Finally, after 14 hours, she went home. But after a sleepless night, she was back on the job, helping whomever she could.
You put those scrubs back on, grabbed your stethoscope, and went back to work. Not a lot of people could have done that.
I think I'm a fighter that way. I think that all of us are stronger than we realize. And when I put my scrubs back on, it empowers me.
Again, she went to the triage center. Again, she waited. Again, no sign of Brian.
Are you going on fumes?
I think so.
But yet you keep going back to help.
I'll just keep going back until, you know, I don't know. I really don't know when, but I'll keep going back.
Today, Teresa's taking time to tend to her own wounds, combing hospitals and rescue centers for news, even setting up an email address, briancomehome@yahoo.com, for anyone who might have seen him in the days since the terrorist attack.
We're going to try and get his picture anywhere we can show it. We're going to try and get more information.
She's also reflecting on the life they've been hoping to build, a new home, a dog, a wedding in June. Finally, she's finding strength in the memory of an evening they shared the night before the terrorist attack.
And he was going to go to sleep, and I said, for some reason, you know, Brian, can you just stay up and can we just talk for a while before you go to sleep? And he said, sure. That's when we started talking about our future and how much we loved each other, and we're so happy.
Just really hang on to that moment now.
I hang on to it. And I remember that when we were laying there, he was talking and I was looking at him, and I touched his face and he was hugging me. He's the love of my life.
This has been a difficult week, obviously, for all of us, and especially for those of us who live in the city of New York. It is not the portrait of the city that we wanted to share with the rest of the country in so many ways, but at the same time, it is the portrait of the city at its worst moment and in its best heart. And we're joined now by Robert Herbert, who is a columnist for the New York Times, and Kenneth Jackson, who is the author of the New York Encyclopedia and a walking authority on New York City. Bob Herbert,
Tom,
this is a tough town, but it's really been wounded.
You know, Tom, I've never been sadder about New York than I am now, but I've also never been prouder of this town. I mean, the city is drenched in grief, and yet New Yorkers have pulled together in a way that not only that I've never seen before, but that I never imagined. And the woman that we just saw said that, you know, we're stronger than we realize, and New Yorkers all over the place are proving that this week.
Kenneth Jackson, New York is 400 years old. It's been through a lot, but has it ever been through anything worse than this?
Well, in so many ways, Tom, this is the worst single disaster in American history. But New York has had many other occasions when it was in trouble. At the end of the American Revolution, it was a really almost desolate ruin. Most of its people had left, and yet within 30, 40 years, it was the most important city in the Western world. The draft riots are the most important civil disturbance in American history, and yet New York went on from there. The Great Fire of 1835, which destroyed 675 buildings, and at least in physical scope was much bigger even than this. And yet the city went on to the glory of the 19th century, and the General Slocum disaster in 1904, the Triangle Fire. So the city has had many other desperate moments. This is at least the equal of any of those, but the city has come through and has emerged stronger after each one of those other incidents, and we hope and pray that this current thing will be overcome in the same way.
There's an enormous amount of physical damage at the tip of Manhattan, which is where the city began, however, Mr. Jackson.
Well, no doubt, and it's unprecedented. It's unbelievable in its scope. No one could possibly have imagined this, and yet the city has built itself and rebuilt itself so many times. It's not like the World Trade Center was the first building in Lower Manhattan. This is a city that's most important characteristic, aside from its diversity and in its heterogeneity, has been change and its ability to adapt to the future. So once again, the city is challenged in a way that it's never before been challenged, but I think its 400 or almost 400-year history suggests that the people of New York have been able to come through these kinds of challenges before, and my hope and, again, my prayers are that the people of the city will rally together and it will emerge stronger than it ever has been before.
Bob Herbert, Tuesday was election day in the city. It was a mayoral primary day to determine who the candidates would be to succeed Rudolph Giuliani. Right. Giuliani is getting very high praise during the course of this crisis.
Well, I've been critical of Giuliani in print a number of occasions over the past 7.5, 8 years. But I think this is his finest hour. I mean, not only his administrative and managerial skills have been put to the test, and he gets an A there, but his personality has been great during this crisis. He's set exactly the right tone. He's provided the kind of leadership that was necessary for a traumatized city, and I think he's done really great. I think one of the ironies of this horrible tragedy is that it did happen on primary day, and it was rather a lackluster election season. None of the issues galvanized the population. Now that the campaigning is over, this is the single biggest challenge for whoever is going to become the next mayor, and this issue was, of course, never discussed during the primary campaign.
We have had some divisions within the city, within our various ethnic communities. Do you think that there will be the beginning of healing as a result of all this as well in that area?
Well, one of the pluses of this awful situation is that New Yorkers have been thrown together in a way that people just have to help out, and in fact they want to help out, and you can't avoid one another. But you look at what's happened with the firefighters, what's happened with the police officer, you have the construction trades at work, you have the hospital and restaurant workers. I mean, all these people who ordinarily do their jobs and are never paid attention to, but who contribute to the life of the city, well, now they're all pulling together for one specific purpose, and I do think that a great deal of positive, a lot of positive will come out of that.
Mr. Jackson, do you think that this is the end of the mega buildings in New York City?
No, I don't. The story of New York has been verticality and high density. That's the signature of New York. That's the way it's been, uniquely almost in the whole world. And what I think people don't realize is that the city has been safe because of the skyscrapers and because of the subways, not in spite of them. This highlights another dimension of this, but it's because people live and work together in these high densities that they tend to use subways or buses, or they walk to work, and that makes them safe in the long term, so that over the generations, New Yorkers have been safer than other people, and I think that we'll one day realize that.
Thank you so much, Kenneth Jackson, for being with us tonight, who is the president of the New York Historical Society, and Bob Herbert, a columnist for the New York Times. I think that all of you out there have come to the realization that all of us who live here have known for a long time. It's a big city, but it's a series of connected villages. And this week, we're just all one village trying to recover and trying to help our fellow citizens. We'll have continuing coverage throughout the night on NBC, and I'll see you tomorrow as we continue our coverage with this National Day of Remembrance. I'll see you then.
September the 11th, 2001 was a day of unspeakable violence and outrage, but also a day of heroism and sacrifice.
It was a war zone. It was unbelievable.
I thought I would die. I really thought I would die.
America is in a state of war, and the response to a state of war is a declaration of war.
We spoke to him right after the first plane hit, and he wouldn't leave his friend.
This was an enormous catastrophe. This was an enormous attack against the people of the United States, and I would say all the people of the world who love and honor civilization and humanity.
I'm not going to leave until we find him. We just want answers, just something.
Now's an opportunity to do generations a favor by coming together and whipping terrorism.
The events and sounds of this day thus far, well, here in the East, it is already Friday, would make it yesterday, 1:01 a.m. as you look live at Lower Manhattan. The lights, the searchlights of the rescue effort, lighting up the smoke and dust plume that has been a now permanent fixture over New York. Since the blast, the rumble of thunder now over parts of the New York metropolitan area, and rain is about to become news in New York tonight. While it is generally an unneeded, unwanted visitor to the rescue scene, it will help to dampen some of that plume. Here are the headlines early this morning, Friday, East Coast time, as we come on the air. The president calling this the first war of the 20th century, though it lacks a specific enemy by name, at least any that the American people have been told of. The president will come to New York on Friday to tour the damage. He has called for a national day of mourning, calling on all Americans to go to their house of worship during perhaps their lunch hour from work, pray for the wounded, the dead, their country, and the future. Congress has agreed on some money, a lot of it, 2 times $20 billion, 2 $20 billion aid packages totaling 40. They are also looking for language that would clear this nation to embark on a vigorous military response to the attack. And bin Laden responsible, according to a source. I will quote from the report from our own Pentagon correspondent, Jim Miklashevsky. U.S. government sources tell NBC News that based on overwhelming evidence, the Bush administration has now determined that Osama bin Laden is directly responsible for this week's attacks on America. We now have active thunderstorms just a few minutes to the west of the city of New York, and you will see an occasional flash of lightning. Our reporter on the scene in Lower Manhattan, as we look at the radar and the approaching rain, a substantial area of it this evening that will bring rain to the New York metropolitan area. Jeannie Ohm. Jeannie, is it raining where you are yet? We've evidently lost communications with... Okay, Jeannie, you there?
Brian?
Yeah.
Brian, yeah. I just noticed, you know, you had mentioned the lightning, and about half an hour ago, we really saw a lot of activity, and in fact, I'm starting to see slight droplets right now, so of course, that's the last thing these rescuers need to be dealing with. While, in fact, it will help with the dust, they definitely don't need this at this time. Now, there's a lot of confusion going around, as you can imagine, because there are thousands of people involved in this rescue effort, so every time people come out, they start telling us, oh, you know, we heard there was someone else pulled out, oh, we heard there was another rescue attempt. But the best I've been able to determine right now, and this is, I've heard it from several different groups and now starting to say the same thing, was about a few hours ago, there was a rescue worker who fell down. And so he was the one who was brought out, and there was a lot of cheering. Joining me right now is Reed Tealfold with the New Jersey Air National Guard. And you were actually there, you said, when you saw a lot of cheering. Describe what you saw at that time.
Well, I was standing around the area that a lot of people were working at, and they started calling for a rescue rope, stuff like that, and they brought a man up that was dressed in a T-shirt and blue pants and stuff like that, and he had said that he'd been down there and that there was 3 people that he was trying to get to on the Cortlandt Street subway.
And at that time, everyone was cheering because they thought, in fact, that it was someone trapped from Tuesday, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And so now, as we've heard, though, that it seems apparently that that person that was pulled up was, in fact, a rescuer from today. But, Reed, tell me, people aren't giving up out there. They're really determined to find a survivor back there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We know that there's a lot of survivors down there. You hear a lot of, I know that they hear people down there, they see people down there all the time, that they quiet the crowd down so that they can just get a faint sound of somebody tapping or something like that so they can get people down in there to get them out.
But have you actually heard any tapping?
I have not. I haven't been down into it. I'm down more towards the outskirts, bringing debris out and stuff like that.
And what we're also hearing is that the effort seems to be a lot more coordinated, a lot more people are working in sync, and so they're working together on this.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very synchronized, thing that we got going on down there. I mean, it's flowing really well, and we've actually moved a lot in a short amount of time that we've been down here.
And tell me, going back to that rescuer, when you saw he was being pulled out, what were your emotions at that time? Because I imagine everyone thought that that was a survivor from Tuesday.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was just, it was, like I said, everybody was cheering, and it was just, it was very emotional. You had tingles down the spine and stuff like that. It was a great thing.
Okay, Reed Tealful with the Air National Guard from New Jersey, thank you very much for joining us. So again, as we've best been able to determine, it was a rescuer who fell through, but you can imagine everyone here is holding on to hope. They really want to know, and they really were hoping that it was a survivor brought up, but according to the New York City Fire Department spokesman, at this point, they've not pulled out any additional survivors from Tuesday. Brian?
All right, Jeannie Ohm with that live report from Lower Manhattan as, again, a substantial area of rain prepares to move into the New York metropolitan area as we welcome viewers joining us on the NBC television network and, of course, live on MSNBC. It has been a day of many, many developments in this story, chronicled now on a minute-by-minute basis by Dateline NBC's Stone Phillips.